Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Art Gasparo on behalf of the applicants. And here with me tonight is Glenn Wood, Arthur Reed, and Seth Wilkinson. And we're here before you tonight for the second public hearing on this application, which I believe you're all familiar with. I'll just quickly go over it, as well as the supplemental information that we provided. This is the coastal stabilization project, so that we're proposing to install the 20-inch fiber rolls anchored, cover them with sand nourishment, and then to plant the face of the bank for the length of the project. There was a series of questions at the first public hearing, and what we've done is to take the time to prepare a response that essentially we tried to itemize each question that was brought up. I won't go through the letter point by point, but I'll just brief through it, and then we would of course be happy to go into further detail on any of the items. There was also a supplemental report filed by Lee Wisher, who couldn't make it tonight, but it was essentially the same as the material that you heard at the first meeting. There was some questions on the dates of some of the storms, which he clarified and updated in his letter. So it's essentially what you had already heard, but we wanted to be sure that it was clear, because there were some questions about the dates of those storms. Some of the questions that had come up last time had to do with a lot of it centered on monitoring and maintaining the sand cover over the rolls. And I thought that the Commission's suggestion was good, that we really should have more than 3 monitoring transects for the length of the project. So what I've done is to add, there's now 7 transects which are represented. This is 2 sheets, so perhaps I should open this up. And I put the transects essentially every 300 feet on the 2 ends of the project. And those would run from behind the top of the coastal bank down to the water line. And then what we would do for each of those would be to plot profile views that we could submit to the Commission, which would show the conditions at each of the transect locations in both plan and profile form, which would allow for monitoring in terms of, and then show the previous measurement with the current measurement. So then you would always have a comparison of exactly sort of what's happening between your reports. It was very clear from the Commission at the last hearing that what you want to see is an enhanced level of monitoring for this project, and that's exactly what we've brought forth and are committed to doing with the twice annual surveys that will include both photographs and looking at the beach composition. As we went into it the last time, the beach does change with the season between a sandy and a cobbly beach and conditions. But in general, it tends to seem to be a seasonal fluctuation, and that we would then be able to document that at the transects and include that with the reports that we would give you twice a year. Further, we would agree to the same conditions that you've placed on past similar projects that have to do with post-storm requirements, that the storm is defined in terms of sustained winds for a period of time. Any storm that exceeded that threshold, then we would do the same, essentially surveys and monitoring that would be done on the biannual basis. So the Commission would have information both twice a year as well as after any storm. The what we're really looking to do, a lot of the other questions that you had were related to assessing the need for maintenance. And again, when we're doing these surveys and when we're looking at the project, the goal, of course, is to add sand as needed to maintain that 4 to 6 inches of minimum cover above the fiber rolls. And again, this entire design and system is what we're trying to do is to work within the guidelines of Mass CCM and Storm Smart, and using a bioengineered soft stabilization solution to help the vegetation take hold and grow without just losing the toe and having, if we just add sand, and having sort of a slumping and loss of that vegetation. Give the vegetation some time to become established. And certainly, should you have more questions, once I'm done on the vegetation and the planting, Seth is absolutely the expert and has come up with the planting protocol and the planting composition and mix for the project. There was some questions about how the terminal ends of the project would what would they be like, and whether they would taper. And so we have added notes to the plans. Again, these are updated plans that we've provided to you since the first hearing, the additional transects, and then we've put notes on the plans that we would taper the fiber rolls at 45 degrees at the end of the project back into the bank. And then we've also held it on the west end, on the east end, 10 feet off of the property line, and then on the west end, we butt into an existing project that allows for planting and coastal nourishment in of itself. And so I've referenced that file number and approval there. So they're maintaining and nourishing their beach at that end anyway. And then we would just tie into that. We would stop short of the property line, but we would then do 45s to taper the rolls back into the bank. We also, as part of the supplemental letter, there had been a few questions that had been raised by Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program. So we addressed their questions in the same letter to try to just keep it all together, sent both you and them the same information all. And we did receive a letter from Natural Heritage, which was a conditional no-take letter, that in their view the project could proceed subject to a condition included by the commission in the order that there would be no work between April 1st and October 31st.
On the coastal beach.
On the beach. And in addition of sand on the beach, vehicular access. So we understand that condition. Other than that, Natural Heritage didn't have any additional comments or conditions for the project. And we addressed all of their questions, which were copied to you in this letter, so that you could see exactly, sort of everyone's getting the same information. Some of the other questions or requests for information had to do with the Maya fauna study. We've looked into that, and we agree that we will perform that study to take a summer sample of invertebrate life within the beach from 3 locations in the project area, and 2 at the beach north and 2 at the beach south, and then provide the commission with those results of that sampling. And again, that is very similar to the condition that it was part of the order for Wisconsin Beach Preservation Fund. So we saw that you had you asked for that information. We investigated it, found someone that could do that work, and feel that it will follow the same protocol that you had imposed for them on this beach. There was a question about whether this bank was used for swallows. We investigated the entire length of the bank. We didn't see any swallow activity. We didn't see any signs of nesting in this area. And there was also questions about groundwater, whether there was groundwater breakout through this coastal bank. And likewise, we did not observe. I walked up and down and have looked and did not see any areas that I thought were even suspect of groundwater breakout. Questions with respect to monitoring cobble content. Again, the photographs at each of the transect locations with each survey, and then there was and I don't want to go through in terms of the volumes, we've provided that in the household group report, and as well we would report to the commission as part of the each biannual report the volumes of sand that have been delivered. So the commission will have a record of exactly what is being provided to the system for nourishment. And again, we're working with all of the property owners are the applicants in this area, and are working cooperatively on the project. The order of conditions, as we had stated, would of course be recorded against each of the properties, and the commission could initiate enforcement action against any one of the property owners should you have concern at any individual location, though we don't anticipate that to be a problem. This is a cooperative approach, and we believe that that's a very strong aspect of this project, is that the group of neighbors coming together with a soft solution that follows the guidance of Mass CCM, right out exactly from what is documented, will by doing the vegetation and soft solution, hopefully head off any need for somewhere there may in the future be a need for coastal engineering structure that may qualify or not to provide a vegetated stable bank, which of course according to your own regulations and performance standards is a benefit to the interests protected by the commission. We have tried to mimic the again, this design and this project is very, very similar to the two projects that were approved and installed in Shimo at 48 Shimo Pond Road and at 10 North Road, and we've included the orders of conditions with our application. We are voluntarily offering to accept the same set of conditions for this project. The commission worked very hard on those conditions, so to hopefully move things along for you as well in terms of evaluation of a project. Again, we'll accept those same conditions. And with that, I think that we included historical photos that had been requested. Again, somewhat difficult to find. I tried NHA. I didn't really. I included what I could. I thought that the series of aerials on a perspective view on a single sheet might be helpful to the commission. I realized that they're not the clearest, but it's also I was trying to get you the most information that I could across the project area. We included additional cross-sectional detail from Seth of the installation. Again, we're trying to make it very clear to the commission and for the record exactly what is proposed for the project. And then, of course, we had the sediment sampling and sieve analysis done for the sand, the sediment of the bank, and that it's substantially compatible with the sediment from the on-island pit source. We acknowledge there is some variability in the bank itself, but in general, it is a predominantly sand bank with there are some there is some cobble or a couple glacial erratics here or there that are in the project area, but for the most part, in terms of what we're supplying to the beach, we'll be using the sand from the pit, and we've provided that information as well. So with that, I think I've run through. I hope I have each and all of the questions that were raised at the last meeting, and I would turn it over to Seth if you had anything else to add, and if not, open it up for questions or concerns that you might have.
Just very briefly, that this is a plant-focused bioengineering approach. In the long term, it's the plants that will provide. Everything's all the coconut fiber that while it breaks down slowly, it does break down, and after the coconut fiber breaks down, it's the plants that do the heavy lifting. So the underlying theme here is hold the sediments in place long enough to sustain the storms which inevitably will come while those plants are sinking their roots down and getting a nice solid foothold, so to speak, on the bank, and then give it its best chance at both providing wildlife habitat through the plant community that will be established there, the native plants, and a very good shot at sustaining storms of pretty high intensity. Like natural landforms, it's not meant to last forever, the way boulders on a beach or longer-term hard solutions are. But one could expect with the maintenance that's proposed here, somewhere in the neighborhood of a 20 to 30-year design life. And at that point, you would assess it, and if it's stable and the plants are, because at that point it's just plants. That's all that would be left at that point. And if the plants aren't able to sustain the bank and maintain the integrity of the bank, then the applicants would be back in front of you to either do the same thing for the next few decades and a little further back, most likely, if the adjacent areas have eroded back at a high rate. And we really think that this has a very good chance at, not all the homes are pre-78, one or two of them are, and it could avoid coastal engineering structure. And as an ecologist, that's why I do this type of work, to try to provide stability without stopping things like vegetation, migration with sea level rise, and being able to adapt. And we have some projects where we're anticipating it's an upland plant community now. In 10 to 20 years, that might be a high marsh community at the toe of the bank. Only bioengineering approaches can do that. There's no revetments, no seawalls that can support plant life like that. So that's why we're hopeful that you're as optimistic about this as we are, as a great alternative for shoreline stabilization while still protecting all of the protected interests of coastal banks. It's great. A couple weeks ago I was there, and the upper vegetated rolls the grasses are popping right out of them up through the sand. It was renourished as expected in the springtime. The cover from last winter was replaced, and it's performing exactly as it was a mild winter. I have to, somewhat hoping to have like a Juno type storm to really challenge it, but not hoping that too much.
We don't want to hope for too much of that stuff.
No, but so far, and it's by no means our only array along the coastline. We've had these in significantly higher intensity areas. The 18 type. You've got to look at around an 8-foot elevation, 100-year storm elevation in Nantucket Harbor, as I recall. We have them in areas where it's a velocity zone of 18, and they're coming through Juno type storms. So it's a robust. The design hasn't always been that robust. You look back at 10, 20 years ago, they just weren't. They didn't have the integrity that they needed to deal with the types of storms we've been having. And so then you get these projects where you get great vegetation established in the fiber rolls, but then the fiber rolls get pulled out of the bank and the vegetation. Then you've got to try to sort of patch it back together, and that's a lot of disruption. With this, the idea is there'll be good maintenance and nourishment to protect those very important interests of sediment contribution and well vegetated bank. But it's not. It's much more maintenance and support and not repairs, periodic repairs, which is historically, I think, why fiber rolls sometimes have a bad name.
Other questions from the commission?
I have a few questions, I guess. I'm concerned that although this is like a best practice through CZM, it's a best practice to protect coastal property, and that doesn't necessarily take into account the land under the ocean and the beach habitat that we're dealing with here. And that concerns me. I'm worried about a project of this length, and where we would suggest in the harbor that water would go. If we're saying the line is kind of held here, where are we going to go? When I look at a holistic approach to this, I would look at the marsh next door and try and figure out an area for water to go, not just water can't go past this point, which is kind of the way this is laid out. I know there's like a marsh further down that I feel like if we're really looking at the environmental engineering component, we should look at the whole thing. I have a couple of questions about the statement about not very many cobbles or lack of cobble in this area, in the project area.
I didn't say lack of cobble, I said there was cobble and there was some glacial erratics.
So one of the questions was answered that there wasn't significant cobble within this area. But
It says here, how will we monitor the cobble content of the beach? And the answer is the beach composition is highly dynamic, as shown in the report photos, where there was no evidence of cobbles. The applicant will monitor and provide photos of the beach composition at each transect location. Additionally, we will be replacing sand that has been lost to the system naturally. Therefore, the dynamic nature of the beach and near-shore area will continue to occur naturally. So, that's what you're talking about.
yeah, that's
Yeah, I can expand on that. So when the point of that was back to my earlier comment with the seasonality of the changes in the composition of the beach, and when those pictures were taken in the report, it was a sandy beach. Now, another time of the year, there's some of that sand is transported and there is cobble. So there is, change that happens there. That cobble is gonna remain, and we're gonna essentially be adding sand just like the bank would.
right. So when I went through, because I wasn't, I couldn't go for the group site visit, I had to go on my own. I took photos of the bank and the cobble within the bank and some large boulders within the bank, and I
Right,
can submit
those are
those
the
to you.
glacial erratics I was referring to.
Yes, and I just am wondering, those provide habitat, how we're gonna match that, because nature isn't uniform like this project, so,
Well, there's still, we're not moving any of the rocks that are on the beach right now. There are cobbles, there are glacial erratics, there are rocks on the beach itself. So those will remain.
but how will new cobble be provided, because that's being provided currently by the bluff
You should
end.
mail those to
I
Jim
will.
so you can.
Yeah, you need to email those to me.
So,
I'll those.
how are we gonna match these erratics that clearly have provided to the beach, the land under the ocean, the habitat?
I wonder, Art, if, one of the big concerns on the east shore is the cobble habitat on the bottom of the ocean as fish habitat. And I wonder if this bank is similar, if there's been a long-term, slow move back of this bank and dumping cobble out there, if there's habitat out there that's from this bank as well. Have you ever heard anything about that, Jeff? Do fishermen ever comment about that or anything, or?
I mean, fishing around Pocomo is always something that's been kind of interesting, and it's changed. Most of the fishing, especially lately for scalloping, has been on, I guess, what would be the southern side of the point, is the area that's been most historically used for shellfishing resources. On the other side of the point and into the head of the harbor, it's much sandier, and then the middle of the head of the harbor turns to, trying to think of the nicest way to put this. Last time I was in it, it's like mayonnaise. It's just dark, gross mayonnaise. I mean, I could go up to my elbow without any resistance and stop there because I didn't want to stay. So,
So it's a unique habitat.
When we dredged it, we had to stay away from this area and not pumping it. We were pumping waste we
Yeah.
should say. And then
That was no good. Huh?
yeah. Yeah, it's one of the reasons why the aquaculture leases are in the middle of the head of the harbors, because there's nothing living beneath them. It's how they qualify as sites. So, it's an
Nothing
interesting
that we're
area.
testing for, anyway.
Nothing that's looked for. Yes.
One thing that's important to note about cobble is that how cobble behaves in a storm and with coastal processes is actually quite different than sand. So it's generally understood that cobbles can migrate landward takes an extraordinarily high-intensity storm to pick up cobbles and take them seaward. You can understand that because there's wave energy is going in a landward direction, so you can roll those cobbles essentially landward. With sand, it's light enough that it just has to get suspended, and then the littoral processes, it can, depending on its grain size, it can stay in suspension for a very long period of time, and that's why you can get these migration patterns that go all over the place, and is very important to the littoral system. Cobble tends to stay put or move landward, so it's not like the cobble that's coming out of the bank now is migrating, into land under the ocean. At one point, historically, that's probably where the cobble came from.
Well, but the ocean is, if that bank's eroding, the ocean is migrating to that
The
cobble
ocean's
and providing.
interacting with whatever lives in that area, whether it's under the ocean or not.
Absolutely correct, but we are, this is, with coastal stabilization, you're sort of putting a line in the sand and then, modeling, and I think everything's been done with this project, modeling the sediment contribution so that you're following existing conditions. So the concept is that sand gets replaced, so you're essentially holding mean high water at the same location, holding the toe of the bank at the same location, and you don't need to be adding cobbles in the beach area because those cobbles will never make it out to the land below mean low water. At some point, as I said earlier, these don't last forever, so at some point the shoreline will retreat back, and then those cobbles become available because they're in the bank, as was noted. And the other aspect is that because there's so many transects now, and we will be monitoring cobble, if we're seeing some sort of dramatic change, I think it would be reasonable, we've talked about coming back in after, a few years to report and have a dialogue. We could talk about other ways, but I think that really needs to get informed by some data. I don't even know how you go about trying to say how much cobble, what size. These are, I've never even seen that, attempted unless someone was trying to do a cobble berm, which is by the Army Corps of Engineers called dynamic revetment, which I don't think you want. But mixing cobble into sand is there's a lot of issues associated with that, and I think it's important to remember that the cobble that's in place is not going to be affected. No activity is proposed on land under the ocean, and the only thing that's happening is there's natural erosion happening, and it goes from the bank to the beach to the land under the ocean. That's going to continue to happen. So we don't feel that we're interfering with that very important cycle at all.
So, and you just said it for me. So you're drawing a line in the sand. So where is your projection that the water's going to go? If we're not having natural erosion occur at this area, is it going to be near the haulover? It's going to have to go somewhere.
That's not the way the DP looks at it. It's very hard to make a change on the land and affect the level of the ocean.
Not the level per se, but when we have a storm surge, if we're not having natural erosion occur here, it would be like the end effect that would happen somewhere. Essentially, there's...
So if we compare it to what's happening now, because remember this landform is more or less level, you take away 3 linear feet off this bank, you still have the same exact buffer to stormwater. Is that what you're talking about? You're not changing the geometry of how floodwaters affect.
I think the question is more a displacement issue.
Right.
And that's where,
and the reality is that it's not an issue from a regulatory perspective under the state act or your bylaw because landslide subject to coastal storm flowage doesn't have any performance standards, and there's a series of adjudicatory cases the DEP has issued saying that there's no requirement to do compensatory flood storage for fill in a coastal floodplain because the adjudicatory cases basically say that it's beyond de minimis. You can't calculate it. And so basically they've determined it's a non-issue. I just finished sitting on the panel for that with you, Seth.
Yes.
And in fact, we've got draft regs that DEP should be issuing for the first time ever for landslip and coastal storm flowage. And again, our working panel didn't even go near that, based on the long series of adjudicatory cases finding that that issue is, from an engineering or a numbers perspective, beyond de minimis. So, I mean, it's not like ordering land subject to flooding where you got to do compensatory flood storage. Plus, in this instance, we have no fill. We're not even filling anything. We're just putting a face on the existing bank. So, you know, there is no, from a regulatory perspective, there's no displacement issue. I mean, conceptually, I follow what you're saying, but it just isn't something I think from a regulatory perspective is within the Commission's jurisdiction under the Act or the bylaw.
Can we get your name for the record, sir? Sorry.
Glenn Wood,
Thank you.
Boston Council for the applicants. Okay. You know, there's a string of those cases.
And I think
Pretty clear.
If I may, it's from an engineering perspective. I'm following both of you exactly, and this would be to say that this sliver of erosion on this piece of the beach, that volume is going to somehow impact all of Nantucket Harbor or the Northwest Atlantic Ocean.
No, that's not what
I don't.
That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting the head of the harbor. So you have one.
Again, all of Nantucket Harbor, I just don't see it as from an, how do I, as an engineer, from an engineer, and I don't want to be argumentative, I want to be responsive. I just don't see that as
It's impossible to monitor.
right, a concern that is really going to have a negative impact on your protected, on the interest you're charged to protect. We're not gonna, by the volume of this height of that type of bank somehow change Nantucket Harbor water storage.
Well, I think we need to, I don't know, I think this is getting a little too big a scale here. I would have concerns about much smaller scale, about, you know, again, I think this, the way I envision this thing, you know, the worst thing, of course, is a wall, a hard metal wall or something like that, or a hard bag full of sand or something like that as far as reflection and not absorbing any energy. Where a natural, you know, beach and bank, the water comes in, it has to run up the beach, that pulls energy out of it, it hits the wall, erodes some of it, kind of runs up the wall and loses energy. And I would think that this project, the way it sounds, is going to act more like a natural bank because it's not a vertical, totally vertical structure, I don't believe. It's kind of slanted back. And it's going to have vegetation on it. So I would suspect it's going to absorb energy fairly well. Now, I don't know. I'm guessing. I'm not a coastal engineer or anything of the sort. I've just sat on this commission for a long time and heard a lot of stuff. And, you know, so I would hope that these structures don't cause loss of beach by, you know, high energy coming in, high energy going out, or end scour because it just is chucking that energy around the edge. But I think we need to look at that to see, you know, and I guess my thought, and I guess we didn't think through the first application as clearly as I would have liked, because it sounds like if we were going to have an alternatives analysis of various types of projects to put before a qualifying structure, that this would probably come out on the top of the list, I think. You know, again, my opinion of it, but that still doesn't mean it's perfect, and we haven't, you know, you know how Nantucketers are. We like to see it work here. You know, I mean, you go back to the stories of Nantucketers getting themselves in big trouble because they had to prove it locally first. You know, we're not going to go to that island because we haven't heard other people say there's no headhunters over there, so we're going to sail all the way back to South America and die, and we're going to be the headhunters, you know. So, but that's our history, and I still, you know, once I got here, I started thinking like that too. I don't know, the size of this project, I think, is a little bit worrisome to me, and the fact that it is in front of houses where we wouldn't normally put any kind of structure in front of on the beach, you know, beyond just a piece of fence, snow fence, yeah. And so I would personally rather, you know, I think by our local bylaw, virtually anything that's designed to control erosion is a coastal engineering structure. And I think this would qualify as one. And I would rather see us call it a structure and give waivers if necessary, or, you know, and then we would be able to say which house it goes in front of and which house doesn't.
Well, real quickly with that, I just want to touch on that because that's moving into something a little different, and I know it's come up. The project in Shimo, which is the most comparable project design-wise that we've had, was very specifically found to not be a coastal engineering structure. So administratively, I would say if you're going to go down that path, you would have to establish some reasonable, clear and distinct differences in the design features of that project to this project and have that discussion to find that. But I think that would take some pretty extensive conversation to get to, and I, personally speaking administratively, I don't necessarily think that length is the biggest determining factor on that. I think you'd have to evaluate design features. It's just a,
Could you clarify which lots would have pre-78 homes on it? Just so I can
These two.
close to each other.
I think a point layered on that Jeff made is that also, I mean, this design, not only based on other findings that you've made, but, you know, this is CZM's BMP, if you will, for installation. And DEP has likewise determined that this, as CZM had found, that this is not a coastal engineering structure based on, largely, I think it's about the concept of function, how it functions, how there's the opportunity for sediment to, and there's a give and take, whereas a revetment or a bulkhead or anything like that, obviously, there isn't that continued ability to have that interaction. Admittedly, we are putting a line in the sand, but from a regulatory standpoint, that's allowable. So it's really a functionality issue, I think.
I guess to add on to that too, not that Glenn and I are going to piggyback for the rest of the night, but thinking about that in the performance standards and the state evaluation too, if that was an avenue that the board really wanted to pursue, I would almost recommend doing that under evaluating the structure under the state act and then issuing out an order, a positive or negative order underneath that under the state act. And then if they really believe that it's separate and distinct and wanted to pursue that discussion, to maybe review that as a issue out a different order of conditions under the local bylaw, if that makes sense to people. I know it's not the most convenient way, but it would take a pretty thorough discussion, I think, to overcome the finding previously issued, though, so.
Well, and this is only my opinion, and I hate to, given the climate here on this island about making a mistake, I'd hate to say I made a mistake, because, you know, I don't want to be the next one hung out to dry.
You know,
But,
I think on that, and it's a good point. I mean, I've been doing these going back to Gene Ratner's geotubes. I mean, that was my project way back then.
Oh, so we should.
In that project, I'll just give you a little history, because none of you were on the commission. I mean, this goes back 25 years, 20 years. I mean, that was approved as an emergency cert by DEP and put in and allowed. Same with water, another client of mine. Those were proven to be really bad ideas. Those were the mouse traps, if you will, at the time, which were bad installations. Admittedly, I wouldn't propose one ever again like that. And they didn't work, they didn't function, they slumped, they had problems, they had all kinds of issues. Ultimately, they failed. And they were far more hard. There's a far different functionality. We've looked at other designs that have, you know, just jute. Won't work here. We're in a V-zone situation. Jute doesn't allow it. We've dealt with different types of core designs. I mean, the stuff that Seth is bringing over from Germany right now that I'm using at multiple projects up and down the shoreline of the Cape and the islands is far more robust, but still allows that ability with sand to interact. And so I think we're at a point where we've got the best design that we can come up with the products that we're pulling in and the hardware with anchors and everything that's available that we can find literally on the planet. But even with an approval, if there's a problem, it allows us to go in and try to fix it, or if there's a failure, it allows us to deal with it. And it's not a permanent install, a permanent array. It allows for the opportunity over time, over decades. These properties, are there for a long period of time. It isn't like Sheep Pond Road, where I know that they have 10 feet a year. I mean, they've got a very limited time frame, and those houses are gone, and they're in a retreat mode very fast. This is a very different situation with, a very small, very modest, manageable erosion rate. But it's a good point.
So is DEP allowing these in front of
Oh, without a doubt.
non-pre-78 structures?
Sure, without a doubt.
But-
Because they're not CESs.
It's like we did in Shelby.
And I mean, you don't define those either in your bylaws, so I think that the two issues I would have with, again, in the counterpoint with, looking at one under the bylaw, one under the act, the point is that you don't define CES as any different under your bylaw than you do under the act. So if you can't do that, then you really have to look to where it's actually been defined and determined to date, which is DEP and CZM. And further, if you bifurcated the reasoning process, I mean, what would be the result? An approval under one, a denial under the other. I mean, and given the past approval with a finding that this isn't a CES, I don't see how legally that would, that would be a really, in my view, arbitrary result.
I guess I have two questions. Did you ever evaluate areas within the project area for like a Spartina marsh or something like that that would break wave flow, or is it just stop the erosion and put beach grass in? Trying to think how the system might transition naturally, and some of these areas would maybe end up as marshy areas, given what we have going here.
Well, I would say that the work that we're proposing is the planting of the bank and not the beach. So you're suggesting a kind of a different
I'm just wondering if that's been
project,
evaluated.
to look at the beach, and our work is on the bank. So that's the area that we're looking to vegetate.
But I can speak to it to some degree. I don't believe there's a fringe marsh.
No.
In
No,
this, and
there's no-
generally, we do a lot of work with, we've actually come up with a design to simulate a fringe marsh, but what I haven't tried to do is propose those in areas that don't have any fringe marsh, because usually there's a reason why it doesn't have fringe marsh. Spartina is very adventitious. If it can grow there, it'll grow there. Sometimes it needs some help with retreat and things like that, and that's where we come in with the simulated peat beds. But I did look at that early in the design phase and felt because there isn't any, that to try to artificially put it in there, one, it's against the law. We're not allowed to, we'd then be swapping one resource area for another, which is not allowed clearly under the Wetlands Protection Act. I think that's unfortunate personally, but that's the way the law is written. So you can restore salt marsh, but you can't create it in an area that's not salt marsh. That's the simple answer. The other thing I wanted to comment on is, we did have some time to think about some of the concerns that were raised at the last meeting, and how can we make this a little bit less intensive from the construction side. And it wasn't an easy decision, but Art and I went back and forth and came to an agreement that if there was sort of a concern, which I think I'm hearing, about the potential structural aspect of this project, there are 360 4x4 posts which are proposed to go into this project to provide some initial stability. We're actually comfortable not removing that, and would be comfortable with the condition which said as much that those are not allowed. So then it's just one approach. It's not a series of approaches. And at that point, I think this is less structural, quote unquote structural, than a snow fencing. Snow fencing is actually, it's not a very strong structure, but it's a structure, and hasn't been determined to be a structure by DEP. But this is root anchoring, basically at that point, giving something for the plants to grow into, and there's no wood, there's no real structural elements on the surface of this. They're all, there's some tiebacks in the ground that no one's going to see, or like, walking by, you never know they were there. But that's one that might help to address that issue. Is, we'd be comfortable still with the integrity of the design without those posts there. Even, in Shimo, it was for 3 years, and then they were moved. We'd be willing to go without them.
And a lot of that, if I may, based on looking at the Shimo installation and stability of the entire array system, I'm comfortable with that from an engineering perspective, that we could have the same performance. And, I like the posts and have proposed them in the past with the sand-filled quartz tubes, because it's quite different where you lose your sand and you get less rigidity, if you will. But based on now having seen and watched and been part of the last 2 installations, they were included partially because we were looking to bring to you almost the same exact proposal of what you already approved. We're happy to back down from that position in terms of go to even something less. So this is, and we feel that we can, and I'm comfortable that based on the way it's constructed and designed, that it will perform and remain stable without those. So we would, as Seth said, have that much less. If you consider that, again, you're starting to find, I think, I hear the discussion and the contemplation as to what is the assemblage of materials that constitutes a coastal engineering structure. And again, the last finding was that this wasn't, and we could even back up from there. So again, we're going, with coconut fiber, really.
Have you done benchmark surveys for myofauna and beach invertebrates and things like that? And I guess, how do you propose to do those surveys and get a...
Sure. Well, we haven't, but we could we could do that this summer, because there's not going to be any work that can happen given the natural heritage condition. So you would then have a benchmark survey. Sure, we could certainly do that.
And beyond that, Art, I believe that there are essentially controls north and south.
There are, right. We
not only
propose 2
provide
north and south
controls
beyond the project area. So you're going to have, you're going to have comparisons. But I understand your point, and I think it is a good one, is that before anything happens, let's get a survey done and get you some benchmark
we have
data.
the glacial erratics, we have all these things happening, and then you just want to dump like a sterile pit sand and say that it's going to be the same habitat quality or have no impact.
Well, I don't think it's quite, sand in the bank, it's still soil, right? So I don't know that the word sterile is something, that I would maybe use to describe. It's a sediment source, and, it's a different sediment source, but it's still sediment.
So in Shimo, you installed these, but have you noticed, because it's a line in the sand, have you noticed that the beach has gotten narrower?
No.
Is there any change there because there's no sediment?
No, because we're providing the
I know
sediment
there's some,
cover.
but there's not. I mean, I just was curious.
I
No.
think the beach elevation actually increased slightly because the sand, over the winter, the sand came off the bank as it was supposed to.
Right.
It contributed to the intertidal, or to the beach, possibly the intertidal. Once the sand comes off, it's hard to know where it goes, but you can see that it's, and I measure it based on the Spartina. We saw
I
more
measured it
Spartina.
based on the top of the posts.
Yeah.
And I thought the same thing.
In the fall, you could see the posts. Now you can't see the posts because those were just a little proud of natural grade. And then I was also looking at the patents, which we worked around, put up snow fencing, as you recall, was a condition of that project. And there seems to be more sand over that. Now that can sometimes even be hard to pick up with a survey, but there has been a survey, I believe.
Yeah, I've done the as-built survey and just got it drafted up for you.
There's a relevant paragraph actually in the Natural Heritage note take letter that just came out today. I shall read, as proposed, a minimum of 2 monitoring events per year will occur once the core system is installed. The monitoring will determine the elevation of the sand cover over the core system and determine the amount of sand necessary to replace the minimum cover, about 4 to 6 inches. This annual monitoring and subsequent nourishment is a key aspect of this project. The division is supportive of said nourishment, as the proposed forest stabilization alone would limit the amount of sediment that would otherwise be available for transport within the littoral system. So once, again, they are looking at it from the standpoint of protection of wildlife, and that's where they come out on it.
Very quick question. I guess my concern with this project is that the beach elevation is so low at the toe of the bank that after the tubes are gone, after the rolls are gone, it deteriorated. And the nourishment is, I'm assuming, would be stopped. And what do we? I mean, are we assuming that the plants that will be down at the toe are going to be forming sort of a dune effect and catching the sand, or are we anticipating having to put something up?
They can, but the way it's actually written is that you're sort of taking a snapshot of pre-existing conditions of that and the design condition, and then we're replacing it in kind on an annual basis. So you're mimicking that, you know, where it is now. If you go out decades, you will likely, with sea level rise, see an acceleration, and there'll be time to address that in the future. I think that's still a ways off. But it doesn't say that actually when the fiber rolls are deteriorated that we would stop nourishing. If it's serving as a dune, then the survey would say it's self-sustaining itself now.
Right, which is the ideal, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But that's the beauty of that type of a condition, is you're really just you're providing consistent sediment contribution, and what you have in those kind of situations is then you get walls with a big storm, and it take some vegetation and some sand out, and you replace it, and that's as natural as it gets as far as mimicking a natural process. That's why I would say.
I guess what concerns me is basically by saying, well, these can go anywhere, we're giving up any control over what goes on the beach at that level anyway. I mean, we're basically saying you can put this anywhere on the North Shore and the South Shore and East Shore and West Shore. Because we're giving up the control over pre-post 78 and
Well, you're not, because you didn't have it in the first place from a regulatory perspective. I mean,
well, we did.
You know,
We
I
said
mean-
you couldn't put a structure in front of a post 78 home.
right. No, a coastal engineering structure, which is precisely defined in the Wetlands Protection Act regs, which is followed and infused into the bylaw. So it's precisely defined. And so, you know, you have what you have, but you also don't have what you don't have from a regulatory perspective. And so, you know, you can't lose control over something that you don't maybe already have regulatory control over. And, you know, this pre-78, you know, is very, you know, it's been very clear. I mean, and that's been clearly, you know, ratcheted down. I mean, the geotubes and some of these things that were approved so many years ago, those were found to not be by DEP, not CSAs. And right now, Jim Mahalo would say in 3 seconds it's a CES, I'm sorry. I mean, so the thinking of the department, as well as thinking of CZM and commissions, has surely evolved over time. And as we get the next wave of softer products, whatever they might even be, I mean, the level of quality and the level of stuff we're seeing right now versus even 5 years ago is extraordinary. You know, it's we just got done, Seth and myself, doing a whole side of an island in Pleasant Bay, and, you know, 8 container loads came over from Germany. You know, a very serious installation, but since it's deemed to be non-structural, property owners have that opportunity if they can show that the project does not adversely affect the involved resource areas, which in this case largely are going to be, you know, the bank and the beach, that interplay.
Strictly from a regulatory perspective, this isn't any more structural, again, from a regulatory perspective, than planting beach grass on an embankment.
Well, disagree with that. I think those core fiber rolls are pretty hard rolls of effectively cellulose and lignin. Another pretty hard roll of cellulose and lignin is known as a telephone pole. I mean, pretty much the same stuff. I mean, it's constructed, the telephone pole is harder, it's a tighter weave, but it's still a roll of cellulose and lignin. And I think if we stacked a bunch of telephone poles on the bank, we'd call that a structure. And I think that's what bothers me is we've got these pretty hard rolls of fiber. I know they decompose, but it's mainly when they will decompose with soil bacteria and fungi and stuff like that over time. But let me read the local definition of an engineering structure. Any bulkhead, revetment, wall, riprap, groin, jetty, plastic sheeting, or other structure intended or constructed so as to prevent, alter, alleviate, or contribute to storm damage or modify wave action, littoral flow, erosion, surface water pollution, or groundwater quality or flow. That's a pretty broad definition. You know, it doesn't say what kind of wall. If it's a wall of core fiber logs, is it still a wall? I don't know. I mean, this is my opinion, and I can't speak for the whole board. This is just, I would much rather have this be a structure and then say, you know, if there's an alternatives analysis, this may very well, and I can't imagine that it wouldn't often come out on the top of the alternatives. And then, you know, it could get a waiver. But then we would have the, you know, more ability to decide if it deserves a waiver or not. Maybe I'm just a control freak.
Well, I think, you know, I think that
It's
that
chair too long.
definition builds out at the end, Mr. Chairman, you know, the act by that last clause. But I think when you refer back to all of the listed items, the point is that it says and other stuff. But I mean, you know, everything has a catch-all. You know, I mean, try to deal with that. But the point is that what I think that is trying to say, which is really no different than the definition of CESs under the state regs, is that here's a series of hard structures, and we know that these types of hard structures have the type of issues that are identified here. To date, the determination has been made by this commission in the previous finding, as well as CZM and DEP, that this type of installation does not have those adverse impacts on protected interests under the Act principally or your bylaw locally. And so, you know, I think that it would you know, it would find otherwise. I mean, you know, for us to request a waiver, which we haven't done, you know, I mean, I could only imagine doing it sort of in the alternative, because we wouldn't, you know, to date, no one has found these in the entire coastline of Massachusetts to be coastal engineering structures. No Conservation Commission nor DEP or CZM and have permitted these in many towns, as has Seth. So, I mean, I'm not going to allow my client to agree that this is a CES under your bylaw. I mean, you know, I mean, if that's how you rule and you want to approve it that way, you can. But I think that. We're trying to get to yes, obviously, locally. That's the goal, additionally.
Well, I think we've gone around and around, and I've been talking long enough. I'd be curious to see what the rest of the commission thinks. And again, you know, don't.
I think, you know, to define by the state, CZM, like a non-coastal structure, and given the fact that we allowed one as a non-coastal structure, it's something that we've already done that once.
It doesn't mean that this structure isn't impacting our resources, however.
You know, I'd have to agree with Dave on the structure issue. My concern in the long-term sustainability of any of these projects is where's the nourishment going to come from? And I've raised that point before, and whether it, you know, I don't know how we can define it or quantify it or whatever, but going forward, there's a certain amount of, you know, significant carbon resources run out. And, so ringing the island with even a soft, seemingly environmentally responsible solution has its drawbacks also.
Nourishment has well-documented drawbacks.
Well, I agree, that, but if that's a tough one. I mean, yeah, I mean, these are gonna be constantly coming in front of us, and personally, yeah, I can see the difficulty with this as being a structure, non-structure. In my mind, let's say this were built and it were last so many years, and the tube were to eventually deteriorate, and then it had needed to be replaced again. At that point, to me, it's a structure, because now you just have to, you have something that's going to be permanent, that's always going to be in there, and you always have to replace that component of it. Say after so many years the tube deteriorates, but the bank holds, and now you don't need the tube anymore. Well, now you have a bank that's been stabilized. I have a hard time. I like to be positive and think that it would do that in this situation, or all these situations where the sea level is so close, high to the toe of the bank. But like I said, to me, it's if we have to keep replacing rolls, then to me it's a structure. I tend to think with all these structures we're putting around here, they're all permanent. There is no sort of a situation. This is the only one that we've seen that eventually the hard component disappears, and then theoretically the bank will protect itself. So I tend to be a little bit more in favor of this than, say, other projects, because like I say, if they keep coming in front of us in a few years and say, well, we have to rebuild the rolls again, we have to put the rolls back in again. I mean, to me, then now you have a solid, it kind of defeats the purpose.
We did provide a failure criteria, which
Yeah.
isn't inconsistent with what you just.
That's sort of my thing, yeah. If you're constantly having to put something back into the bank, then it's not working. Because the argument for this is that it's a sort of a temporary component that will disintegrate, and the bank will then rejuvenate it and will work on its own.
I feel the same. I feel that if it works and we never have to go back to it, that's great. But if there's a frail criteria, then I think we need to look at it. And also resource, like what sand and sediment, just how we'll look proper that.
Yeah,
But
all
I
these
feel that
projects
just
have.
the repair or replacement.
Well, that's a problem on the road, right?
Yeah. So
It's always happening. There's no getting around that. Sea level rising.
If I could throw in really quickly on something that Ashley had said, whether we go through this debate of CES or non-CES, it certainly doesn't exempt it from performance standards and meeting the interests. So your main and your primary task is to make sure that projects meet those standards and are protecting the interests of the act and the bylaw. So having said that, I mean, whether it is or isn't, you still have to apply the remainder of those standards and still, discuss those and deliberate those and whether or not they're going to have an adverse impact, whether it is or isn't. I mean, that's really what it gets down to, is whether or not it can meet the standards or not.
Well, I think the way it's designed, exactly like the one we approved in Shimon, and we found that meets the standards.
Yeah, there's no house back
So
there.
there's no, in my opinion,
So it is a different bluff, though. So this has the glacial erratics. I mean, I can pass these pictures around. There's clearly areas with cobble and rocks and boulders, and we didn't find that in the other bluff.
No, that bluff is rocky.
Yeah.
Well, in the bluff? No, but it obviously is in the bluff, because otherwise there would be so much rock on the beach.
Right, but as far as our evaluation of that project, I don't remember that being.
I think it was significantly smaller in scale. So
Yeah. And it is it was sort of considered a test.
I think this is really tipping us over because it's huge.
So big.
It's big,
And it's
yeah.
a lot of nourishment.
Yeah.
That's. No, go ahead.
In terms of erosion rates, and while it's a longer project, it's the same. In other words, it's more properties, but we're still dealing with the same wave environment, the same climate. There's so many similarities in terms of concern that the chairman expressed that this or anywhere. No, you're still looking at it, in terms of all of the conditions. And I think when you look at this, and this was, I think, laid out pretty well in the materials provided by Woods Hole Group. We're in a very similar setting and situation as Shimmo, while it might be longer. And in terms of volumes of sand, it's nowhere near, and I know that there is, I think because of some of the other projects outside of the harbor, larger erosion rates, volumes of sand that are we're looking at, say 1,000 cubic yards a year for the whole project. It's not, in some cases you've got foundations being excavated here that are taken out close to that. So, and I only try to put that in, and I know that the scale is long, but the erosion rate being what it is and the volume that we're talking about is not going to run in and of itself. I understand all of the points, but I just wanted to maybe put a little bit of scale and context on that it's length, but the rest of it is similar.
Just to follow on that, because there's a common thread with Shimmo again, that we see as a huge benefit of 7 neighbors getting together and all having a system that works together and in concert with nourishment, sediment contribution. If we juxtapose that with Shimmo, what that has is a very much a hardened shoreline that flanks both sides and actually points all the energy right into those 10 North Road and 48 Shimmo. And so you're going to have accelerated erosion there. All that's being directed, and they're the only ones, I believe, doing nourishment. So you've got coastal engineering structures on either side not nourishing, and then sort of asking this one project to do extra heavy lifting with no structural elements to it. And when we compare that to Pocomo, we look at it from wow, this is great. All the neighbors working together, one common goal to make sure this essentially continues to function the way it's supposed to function under the regulations, and not have sort of a hodgepodge of different scenarios, which is what you see in most of the shoreline in most of Massachusetts. Is one property owner tries one thing, another one tries something else, another one's built before 1978, so it does a coastal engineering structure, and those from a coastal processes, they never perform as well. Because there's not a consistent thing. So we may have a slightly different view, but we see this as a real asset of the project because it's contiguous. Everyone's working together to be compliant with the regulations. So we see it as a benefit. But it is 1,800 acres.
Well, I have to say I agree with Seth on that it does present problems when you have several homes with armoring and then you've got one or two without it and you've got these holes in there and then they just get hammered. And it's, we've allowed structures in places where we might not have because they had hard, and again, hard armoring on both sides. And again, in the past, no mitigation sand was ever required. So there was, huge in-scour effects and stuff like that.
It's terrible. I went apart that bulkhead, gabions, stone attachment. It's a mishmash of protection. Nothing works at that point. Everything's working against each other. It's nice that it's a
Well, I guess the whole idea of if the structure or not structure, we're missing a member, and so I'm kind of a bit leery to make a major decision like that without the full commission. But I don't want to hold these guys up forever waiting for that either. And
If I may, Mr. Chairman, too, not to get lost in it, we also, you may open up to the public at some point, too.
yes,
As part of the discussion. It's been a while of
it's
just
been
taking
going on
testimony,
now, yeah.
just
I
to
have an
remind you that we need to do
point,
that.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, that just sort of hadn't come up, and it came up last time, and that is, as you walk the beach and you see there has been various attempts over the years in this area of fencing and terracing, and there's all kinds of stuff going on, up and down and old remnants, and all of that gets removed from all of this. It all then goes away. You're monitoring, you're getting provided photographs, and it all becomes natural vegetated beach. And so I think there's also an improvement to this overall area in terms of the standards and the existing conditions compared to what's proposed. So I did want to mention that.
Okay, well, let's go to the public. Anything from the public? Yeah, Ms. Molden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land Council. I just want to make a few short comments. I really appreciate the Commission's discussion and deliberation about the coastal engineering structure issue. I've been thinking about this a lot in the design and having kind of a hard time myself reconciling the design with the local definition and how you guys have discussed things in the past, even though I know in the Schimel case, you did find that it was not a coastal engineering structure. Having seen that installation after it was put in before the vegetation went in, and observing what a wall of core it is, and I understand and appreciate that it's much softer than some other options, but it certainly seems structural before that bank is stabilized on top of it. So I've been thinking about this a lot as well. So I really appreciate all of that discussion. And it's clear that there's some ongoing concerns from some of the commissioners about maintenance and how that may play into how structural or not this really is. I think that as the commission starts to consider a permit for this project, really looking at those failure criteria, and again, I think as I brought up last time, a lot of the earlier projects that had to do with the core bags and the sand-filled envelopes, I think that there's a lot of ongoing maintenance there after the 3-year permit expires without a lot of follow-up with the commission in a lot of places. And here, as you guys discussed, is a new design that if you're going to continue to determine that it's not a coastal engineering structure, I'm sure you're going to see a lot more of. And as you now know, I think it's going to be really important, the findings that you make, the conditions that you put on this kind of design and project, to be able to carry them forward to future ones. So any way that you can incorporate conditions that does require more follow-up to really be able to reevaluate how much maintenance is it requiring, and do we need to therefore change our determination of how we see this functioning in the future. Just really be thinking about that, brainstorming some conditions so that you can really observe how it is impacting the resource areas out here over the next few years, and then make whatever changes you need to if you decide to permit this project. I think that the length of it is important, because even though the erosion rate is the same, if you end up seeing any impacts, you're looking at those impacts over a much broader area than just a property or two. So that, I understand why the commission is considering that. But really, I would just ask you to think about those conditions carefully and really make sure that you get some follow-up at the end of the 3 years if this permit is issued, so that you can reevaluate it before it remains out there forever. Thank you.
Anything else from the public? Okay. Anything else from the commission? Well, okay. What do you want to do, Art?
And we're ready to close the hearing. I think we've made our best presentation to provide all and address every question, request for information, the biofauna study. We will certainly do the baseline. That was something, a survey this summer that was added to the presentation tonight. And I believe you have everything that you need to close.
Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes.
Do I have a motion to close the hearing?
Motion to close.
All in favor? Opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys for putting up with me for this whole thing this evening.
Well, they're important discussions to have. I mean, that's what we're here to do, and
Yeah.
never feel bad about bringing up a plan, vetting it fully.
Took the hour up, that's all. Going on and on.
How it goes sometimes, eh?
Number 2.
Got to put these guys through their paces, heck. They have the big bucks here for. Okay, that takes us to the trustees of reservations at Cascada Cotu Wildlife Refuge and Great Point.
All right, so just to kind of preface it. Last time we had a couple questions and at the last meeting, and the property manager, Fred Polnack, is back today. So we continue that to, I think you had some questions specifically, Mr. Chairman, to go, that you wanted to ask?
Well, I guess I was kind of hoping to see the management plan and look through it, but I know I've reviewed it in the past, a long time ago, and I didn't have any trouble with it back then. And it is basically to maintain the status quo, which, given the number of birds that they're successfully taking care of out there now and things, seals that they're taking care of, and they do apply driving restrictions when they have to for wildlife concerns and things like that. I think they're doing a good job up there, all in all. I think I've thought about it, and seems to be working pretty well, and I don't want to drag them through too much mud if that's the case.
Or sand in this case.
Oh, yeah.
You can ask me whatever you like. I'm here to answer any questions.
So, if I may, just to kind of refresh, this has been 2 meetings since we've done it, and I'll try to be really quick since the last hearing took so long, is the trustees are back in front of us not to necessarily maintain their existing use. I know that's what their permit says, so I don't want to make it more confusing than I need to. But what's come forward since then is, right now the state has been working on what they call a habitat conservation plan. And one of the requirements to be included on a certificate of inclusion for those plans, to allow you to have a little bit more flexibility in managing things like piping plover, American oyster catcher, least and roseate terns, or that you have to have a current and valid order of conditions to do it. So a lot of these uses, as we know on Great Point, I think anyone that's been on Nantucket since before 1972 will say that driving has gone on to get to Great Point pretty much since they've had cars. And a way to get out there. That what they're looking to do is really what he said, and what's interesting about it, because it's something that I looked into at great length for the town being included, and the thing that kind of tipped me to wait a year to see what was going on is really the management requirements that go with it to get relaxed standards are much more intensive than what we do now with just basic symbolic fencing. And I'll tell you, the easy path that they've set up now is just to say traffic's closed. It's much easier. It's their preferred to do it. You really have to go through hoops. I don't want to speak for the trustees' plans, but I know other plans on the Cape include vehicle corridors that they staff times where they escort people. They walk ahead, but they do it at designated times, so they'll take 20 cars, and if you miss the window that they go, have a nice day, you're going to turn around. And if you want to come back, unless it's an emergency, you wait for the window to come back. So, and it's very much an increase in staffing, increase in other things, and it's not simple, but their first requirement is that you get in order. You explain what your enhanced monitoring schedule is going to be to them, and then they can include you. So we may see something similar like this from the Conservation Foundation or from the town at some point. Fred's just the unlucky one to get to go first. So it's an interesting program. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves.
This is that new set of rules that have come out.
Correct.
To
So what
sort of allow a little more joint use of.
A little bit more joint use. What it essentially allows for, if you're included in the plan, is if you have what they call an incidental take, the standards are a little bit more forgiving if you've been included in or following the protocols that are in place. So for the trustees to say still allow access for vehicles to get from the gatehouse all the way to the Federal Wildlife Refuge up at the end, or to get there, if they're going by areas that have plovers and they're following these new enhanced standards, if perchance there is a take, if a car runs over a bird or something happens, the review standards are different than if it just happens without proper management. So it gives them more relaxed to say we can still get people to enjoy the whole refuge with our uses by our more intensive management that we're permitting.
Right.
and I can clarify a little bit what our intent was in terms of even thinking of engaging in that certificate of inclusion, if you guys are interested in hearing.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
The specific instance that we have on Nantucket in any case, and they're considering getting on board with this program on Martha's Vineyard as well in the future. That here we have a pair that has established a nest about 7/10 of a mile north of the current entrance to the beach over the past several years. That nest has never been successful because it's in an area that has frequent washover. We also have pretty heavy predation by rats and American crows on the property as well. And so the interest was expressed to me from other people in the organization that we endeavor to investigate the option of getting on board with the Certificate of Inclusion program, not so that we could maintain access to the entire property, regardless of whether or not there were plovers there, just so in this one specific instance where we have a pair that may nest eventually successfully 7/10 of a mile north of the entrance, that we would be able to allow vehicles to pass by that one area. We have no intention of ever, at this point anyway, letting people pass through the galls when there are plovers there, simply because it's such a dense concentration of plover habitat. And there are conditions within the that state program that that specify that you can't allow one of these sort of pass-through areas in an area that I think has greater than 15% of the resident plover population, and the galls would certainly fall within that range. We're just trying to investigate options for if that pair down by marker 2 is ever successful. Because if we did have to close there, we'd have less than a mile of beach access for people and absolutely no access by vehicle to Code 2 either, and so that would greatly restrict travel in the area. That said, we're not, this isn't something that I'm participating in a dialogue directly with. Our ecology program people are talking with John Regison about this, and it's something that we're just investigating as an option, not a likely immediate option, but these things take time, and so we just wanted to get the dialogue going now, so we could get an idea of what the budget might entail, because as Jeff mentioned, it's a significant increase in staffing and resources that we would need to put out there if this were to happen. So.
Is there
Just to give
another
an example,
level of
the one
review?
program that the town that I originally looked into it to and still may, we were considering it around our opening a Sackage Pond to give us a little bit more flexibility date-wise. But no one seems to be able to wrap their head around what the requirements would be because it's kind of a weird time of year and it's different. So we're still puzzling that out. But it gives a lot of flexibility to managers with an enhancement of protection, I guess is the easiest way to put it.
Is there a state review then of your plan? Is somebody else going to review it?
There is, yeah.
So we're just basically allowing you to go to that next step of review, more or less, if you have to get it reviewed. And I don't, even though I work for a certain well-known bird conservation organization, I wouldn't feel qualified to review that.
So just to give you kind of a background on that program, again, to be quick, is it's a program that United States Fish and Wildlife is essentially allowing the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to enroll in themselves. So ultimately, the standards that are set for the state review are set as part of a federal review, and then the state gets to review these local certificates that come in to be included into the state permit. So, I mean, it really gets vetted through all of the pertinent protected species organizations all the way through the federal government. So it's pretty comprehensive.
And I think that before Massachusetts climbed on board, there was some pretty intensive review by affected parties. So.
I will say Massachusetts was allowed to also be included because recovery efforts on things like piping plover have been so successful in Mass. There are a number of states in New England and up and down the East Coast that are not allowed to enroll at this point because they have not met their recovery goals. So Massachusetts doing well with piping over management specifically has been able to enroll, but other states like Virginia is not. New York and Connecticut have not. They just don't meet, even for their reduced area of coastline, don't meet the issued recovery goals by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So they are excluded until they can meet those. So all those years of fencing are starting to get some gains for Massachusetts.
Any other questions from the commission or anything from the public? Okay. You ready to close?
Yes.
Jeff, do we have what we need to close?
Yes, sir.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick.
I think we could all agree to write a positive order on this.
I
We
may
should
have-
go back to the last one and just.
Well, I had instructions from the last meeting to draft that.
Oh,
so-
okay, good. Okay, moving on. Lindsay at 15 Pippin's Way.
All right, so this is one just to put this one on really quickly. We were waiting for a natural heritage sign off on this application last time. You know, this is the Pippin's Way subdivision. We have received that letter of no take and no adverse impact under their review. I don't think there are too many more. Jeff also provided some clarity on what was going to happen with the roof runoff and the stormwater systems, and then a little bit of a revised landscaping plan. So that was a catch-up.
Jeff Blackwell for the applicant. There'd been several questions, one of which was what specifically are the species of plants that are to be included in the planting program, and I think I give you a full-size copy which the plant species are.
Yes. Sorry about that.
I can't remember who asked for that specifically, but
Probably us two.
they're noted here. 3 out of the 4 species listed are in the bylaw as appropriate native plantings, and the 5th one is a little false blue stem, which is a ornamental bunch grass, as I learned, and I'd leave that up to you to assess its appropriate use on the property. I didn't read anything about invasive properties to the bunch grass.
Is it carrying? It's a funny color, isn't it?
It's not native.
Yeah, that would
Another
be.
question was, I think Ashley, you'd asked about the lighting specifically, and I can get this piece of paper out of here. They had provided specific fixtures and locations for the lighting on the main house. So this particular fixture is clearly strikes me as a down lighting, and these in particular don't strike me as a downward lighting, but I asked the owner, and he said that those are going to be motion sensitive, so they're not going to be left on. But I'll leave it up to you as to. He said he could let them go and pick another fixture.
I think facing the wetland, we wouldn't want stuff like that,
I don't disagree.
especially.
We want these,
Yeah,
you
I
could
mean,
point
they're
these down more.
down, and
Okay.
at night if something's walking through, then it gets lit up, yeah.
There might be a few deer out there.
Right.
He said that he would substitute these fixtures for the more like these spots, if that was
I would say we've conditioned many times before that all lighting be downward directed lighting, and not to be able to shine into the resource area. So that's something that's not unheard of.
Did we get to the bottom of these trees out here? If they are existing trees, or if those are trees you're adding and what they're gonna be?
Those are just general planting locations of the 6 species. They're not a row of existing trees out there.
So this is just gonna be shrub planting in here?
Yeah, because
Because
these
these
are
are
all
all
shrubs
basically
except for the
shrubs.
blue
Yeah.
stem.
Mhm.
And all those cherry sprouts out there, they just going to be kept mowed, or?
Yes.
And then I know I asked a question on, like, how much soil we're gonna be removing and then maybe amending back relative to our 50-foot line, like as far as scraping the property.
There's not going to be, aside from the planning activities, there's no plan to do any scraping or amending the soils. We have the MESA limit of work line that is staked in the field, and that is an absolute no cross line.
And it's 50, oh, excuse me, Ashley, go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering where that is relative to some of these trees then.
Okay.
Well, here's the
That's-
50.
This LOW line here is the MESA line, limit of work line.
Okay.
So is 50% of the 25 to 50-foot buffer being maintained in a natural condition?
Well, the formula along this short stretch is not satisfied, but on this property, from this location all the way up and around the corner, this is some 400 feet. Once we get up around the corner, where there'll be no change.
Okay, well, that counts, yeah, as long as you're,
Yeah, well, when we looked at the natural heritage plan and when they did the original subdivision and building envelopes, there's a lot of buffers out on the lot. So I
okay.
don't-
So the little blue stem in general is fine species, but we would prefer a type that is as close to the local type as you can find, which this, I don't know what this is from, but that whole color just is, looks like the stuff they planted out at, what's their name?
Norwood Farm?
Norwood Farm Trust, yeah. Something from somewhere else, it's not our local type. And I know you can't probably get Nantucket seed, but there are types that are close. And,
I think that's,
yeah, I think, yeah, if Seth is around, he would know.
He's probably the best source for that.
Okay.
Brian,
Well, something you could certainly condition too, that it be
local, yeah.
There's no local genotype.
No, you can't, I mean, there is, but you'd have to go out and get it yourself.
Right,
and
right.
That's not easy.
Stop picking.
But there are some sources that are pretty close.
Mhm.
They've actually, I think, I was talking to Seth about it, and he said that somebody is manufacturing it or growing it on the West Coast.
The West Coast.
But with Nantucket seed.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Really?
That's interesting.
If you want to condition
Yeah,
that,
we
we
can-
can get,
Yeah, we'll
As
do
close to
that with
local
all
as
your
possible.
plans, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Anything from the public? Okay. Jeff, you ready to close?
I am,
The other Jeff, do we have everything we need to close? Start calling him JC, except you might get a big head. Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
The problem with JC is we got a JC in our office. Joe is a JC. We don't want too many JCs.
Half the Jeffs I know have a last name that starts with a C. I wonder if parents think about that when they're doing it. Okay. Yeah, I say in general, the Jeffs I know are all good. Night, 12 East Lincoln Ave.
Blackwell for the applicant. I believe the only question or request for further information was regarding infiltration of the roof runoff. And I spoke with the architect. He provided the location of the downspouts. Gutters had been planned, and from the downspout locations, infiltrator units, there's a cut sheet here of the infiltrator units, and they're shown graphically associated with each of the downspout locations. So they will pick up all the roof runoff.
And this is just in land subject to coastal storm flowage?
This is a land subject to coastal storm flowage only.
Okay. Great. Any other questions for Jeff? Or anything else from the public? In which case, are we ready to close, Jeff?
I am.
Jeff, do we have everything we need to close?
Yes, sir.
I have a motion to close. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jeff.
Okay, the haul over, 165 Walnut Road.
This is an application to obtain a permit for two ramps that were constructed onto existing ramps or boardwalks or decks, and also there was a second-story balcony constructed. The ramps, were constructed to facilitate the access of an elderly owner, and there's pictures that were presented. These ramps are constructed on piles, and they don't impede the movement of sand in this barrier beach. It's a 16-acre parcel of property that was permitted back in the late 70s or very early 80s, actually. I don't know if you've seen the pictures from the packet, but you see the ramps they certainly approach the handicap access definition for
Yeah, it looks like there's skirts on
it's just it's still up off the ground. It doesn't stop the passage of sand.
it. How high off the ground is that, and the skirts?
Well, they vary.
Because it looks like they're down to the ground on there.
You can see.
Oh, there, okay.
Yeah.
What purposes do the skirts serve?
I'm sure the skirts are decorative to just to hide the frame. Yeah.
I don't know, I think they'd be better off without the skirt as far as sand movement goes. You think it'd be a problem to take those skirtings off there? With the owners?
As long as the framing, I guess if the framing behind the skirts, usually on a deck skirt board, the framing is of the same dimension. Basically, you're not really removing the framing that's behind the decorative skirt board, but we could look at it. I frankly, I didn't look under there, and I'd be happy to check.
The good news is this is in natural heritage, so we're waiting to hear from them anyways, so.
Yeah, so typically, yeah, I understand, so.
Yeah, you wouldn't waste any more wood you had to.
Problem with skirtings anyways.
guessing, but I can, take some more pictures or.
Well, one of the problems with people constructing things without the benefit of a permit is sometimes we don't like it and they have to take it apart and build it the right way. And this, if there's that much material underneath there that's going to impede the flow of sand that much, they may be looking at some major work on their ramps.
Real quickly too, I wanted to throw in there, you're also looking for, with the ramps, a second floor cantilevered balcony that was constructed as well. I just don't want to leave it off because it's something else that we included in any permit overview. Yeah, Jeff provided pictures and highlighted it on the plans.
This feature here.
Look, it sticks off the side of the building and nothing touches the ground, but it,
That's pretty high up there.
yeah. I just didn't want to get it lost from the record.
It's over on the other side of the building. Over here. Yeah.
Oh.
Any other questions? Well, since we have to continue, Jeff, could you bring in the details on the under the deck
Sure.
construction then? Okay. Anything from the public? Seeing not. So Jeff, would you?
It's, the person's elderly and owns the property. I don't know, but the wheelchair is used. Okay, thank you.
So Jeff, you have to request a continuance
Oh,
for 2 weeks?
I'd like to request continuance for 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you. So unless I hear an objection, we'll continue this. Are you?
Can I, just one quick question, for these walks, these were already permitted
Yes.
and built as proposed, and it's really just these additions, right?
This further.
So these, they look like they're built the same,
Interesting point.
right? I'm just.
Yeah,
just for
that's a good
clarification
point.
purposes.
But,
Okay, so unless I hear an objection from the commission, we'll continue this for 2 weeks. Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, Adele and Alderson at 8 High Brush Path.
Hello, Don Bracken for the applicant. This was filed by Brian Madden from LEC, so I'm taking his place here tonight. I'll start by saying we will be revising the plan, so I am going to ask for a continuance. We got some revised landscaping plans yesterday, which include basically just rotating the existing pool as you see it to line up with the cottage rather than the way it is on the current plan, which lines up with the main house. Go through it, we're looking at a bordering vegetated wetland on the northern portion of the lot, part of the burnt swamp area. The site has an existing lawn area that actually encroaches partially into the wetland area. The proposed project includes, in addition, 1,028 square feet to the existing building on the southwest side of the existing building, away from the wetland area. We are also replacing the existing septic system. About half of the existing leaching trench is within the 100-foot buffer. The proposed soil absorption system will be completely out of the 100-foot buffer. The existing septic tank will be removed, crushed in place. A new septic tank with a pump chamber will be installed within the 100-foot buffer. Will be a slightly mounted septic system to get the groundwater separation for the new system that the existing system currently does not have. We're also reconfiguring the driveway. It's kind of light on the plan, but it has 2 driveway entrances. We're going to remove the southern entrance and reconfigure the northern entrance. Same entrance off the street, but There'll be a turnout with 2 parking spaces that will be the pervious surface, will not encroach within the 25-foot buffer to the wetland. It will be within an existing lawn and disturbed area. Also, between the 25 and the 50 foot around the house, there's going to be some additional landscape plantings and a walk or a hardscape. And toward the back, as I mentioned, the pool is going to be revised. It's going to be in the same general location outside the 50-foot setback. There will be a stoop and stairway added to the back of the existing cottage, as shown, again outside the 50-foot setback, and a proposed pool fence partially within the 100-foot setback. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
May I touch on this? Are you going to like revegetate some of the existing lawn that's between the 25-foot and the existing wetland?
We are not proposing that, but that would be a good question for Brian Madden at the next meeting. He could probably have better answers for that if that's what you want, or the commission wants, and he can suggest something. We did request a waiver for the excavation of the swimming pool. I did the test pits. We do know where the groundwater elevation is. The addition is going to be in a crawl space, so we don't need any waiver for the construction of the addition. But the pool, when they construct it, which should be in the fall, when the water table a little lower than what we found it this past beginning of May, shouldn't require any dewatering. But if it is required, there's plenty of space outside the 100-foot buffer to pump the water on that temporary basis.
The other issue is this deck that's, between the 25 and 50.
Yes, that's existing.
Oh, it
Yeah,
is
that's
existing.
existing.
Oh, okay. So then it's just the patio but that's a pervious patio,
The only thing with,
I would think.
I think that's landscaping. Anything within the 50,
Right
the
here.
the shaded area? Oh, I'm
Close
sorry.
patio.
Yes, you're right.
And then these are new flagstone.
Correct. Yep. There is a brick patio. The plan could be dark. You see this brick patio? That's going to be removed. So that looks bigger than the one that's proposed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if it's up, yeah, okay. Any other questions? Anything from the public? Okay, so,
Well, I'd say we have a couple options. Is we could close this hearing and talk about issuing out an order, and then have the pool rotation come back as a minor mod, or can hold it over for the revised plan, since that's the only feature that seems to be a change. I guess that's kind of up to you.
I had suggested that to Brian. Brian thought it would be cleaner to, I think he wanted to come back for the next meeting anyway, so.
okay.
I mean,
So,
that's not up to you guys.
that's-
You can certainly
yeah.
continue.
Yeah,
That's
that
fine with
totally
me.
works, yeah.
We don't have an issue either way, because it's not, yeah. I appreciate that,
Yeah.
though.
So sometimes things are
Yeah,
trying to get moving. So.
yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Okay, well, then let's, you want to continue then?
Yes, we
So unless I hear an objection, we'll continue this for 2 weeks. Okay. Thanks, Don.
thank you.
Okay, BeachNut LLC, 1A Crow's Nest Way.
All right. Well, Paul is coming up. Just going to say real quickly, Mr. Chairman, to make a couple appearances as part of the board of selectmen meeting this project.
Okay.
So if I have to leave, Joanne will tag it for me. Guess that makes everything a lot faster.
We can do it in 5 minutes. If I can put that one on.
Wow.
And I've got a colored one right here, which may help. For the record, Paul Santos with Nantucket Surveyors, LLC, on behalf of the owner and applicant Beach Nut LLC. This is a notice of intent for the redevelopment of an existing parcel on Crow's Nest Way. It is a site that was before you a little over 3 years ago for a potential buyer that received an order of conditions on behalf of the prior owner to raise an existing structure, or in that case was to, this structure is located right in this vicinity here, existing structure here, existing structure right here, was to pick that structure up, pull it forward, renovate it, add a standalone garage on the property, and develop it in that manner. The resource areas that we have are essentially, the most restrictive is the limit of a coastal dune, which runs in a north-south direction. There's a 25-foot no disturb, a 50-foot no build, which the existing structure is currently in the 50-foot no build. And then there is a bordering vegetated wetland along the southerly property line over here, which is a bordering vegetated wetland over in this area. That also has a 25-foot and a 50-foot associated buffer zone with it. So the prior application, as I said, was to remove the structure completely outside of the 50-foot, renovate, add the garage. That order of conditions has expired, so this is a completely new application in which we are going to raise the existing structure, construct a new primary dwelling and pool, a guest house, and a garage, all of which would be outside of the 50-foot no build, so there are no waivers required for the proposal before you. I have asked for a waiver for the work within the 50-foot setback to remove the existing structure. So there is a waiver request in the file that has been submitted for the work in which we will raise the existing structure and remove it outside of the 50-foot setback. The long-term plan is to then let that area stay the way it is now with the structure removed, and all the proposed main dwelling, pool, guest house, garage are all outside of all the regulatory setbacks. The site itself is located above the floodplain. There are no floodplain concerns. The prior application did make a submittal to NHESP. The actual developed portion of the site is outside of the a mapped area, but a previous application was made, and it did receive a will not adversely affect ruling under the Wetland Protection Act and a no-take under the MESA component of the Act. I did, under this notice of intent, refile with NHESP just as a procedural item, and have not heard back. So from that point of view, we cannot obviously close the hearing because I have not heard back from NHESP with regard to the refiling of the application. We do have our DEP file number. However, we do not have a response yet from NHESP. As I said, the waiver request for removal of the structure was based on the premise that there'll be a long-term net benefit or improvement to the resource area. No work within the 25. We'll be removing the structure in the 50-foot, and then the area between the 50 and 100, whereas it doesn't require a waiver, is essentially to raise the existing structure, construction of a new dwelling, guest house, pool house, relocation of the existing driveway, and associated grading and landscaping. The site itself, the main dwelling itself, is serviced by a shared septic system on the lot to the north. That will continue to remain in place. That system is located up on the front of the abutting lot along Crow's Nest Way. We'll do a small two-bedroom system at the front of the existing parcel to handle just the guest house. Again, septic tank, leach system, and components for the system all outside of the 100-foot setback from the bordering vegetated wetland, which is this area here. So it's basically a redevelopment of the existing site, adding structures to it, but again, all basically within the 100-foot buffer zone to two resource areas, and a bordering vegetated wetland in the coastal dune. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Paul?
So, actually, I can give you a little bit of this coastal dune is the green line, 2550, bordering vegetated wetland, 2550, and then the 100 is the yellow line.
For just a little existing houses in 50.
Well, the house, the deck, the backyard. I mean, it's a small amount, but it is within the 50. And then that would just be left in a natural state. There's no plan to have that as a manicured lawn or anything else. The 25 and 50 would basically be the sand area.
Is there a plan to revegetate with something?
I did not have one. No, we haven't set forth a plan. You mean the 25 to 50?
So where you're taking the house out, what's going to be back displaced?
Basically, it's a sandy material. My intention was to just leave it as a sandy material as an interface between the house and then to the there's a path down to the beach in the dune area. Obviously, the pool area would be developed. The backside of the house is the decking, and it wasn't shown on the architectural plans that we provided as a manicured lawn either. It was just shown. I mean, this area was defined as a front lawn, but.
It's going to need something.
Hmm?
It's going to need something. I mean, maybe if the house has been there a long time, there's going to be no seed source.
Yeah, there's no vegetation there. It's basically a shallow sand source. Yeah,
Just sand.
it's not dune, but it's sand. You know what I mean? It's a small area
What,
there.
that's something you could also condition that beach grass be replanted or
Yeah.
whatever you felt was necessary.
Yeah, something should be in there, yeah.
I'd
Or-
like to see this one.
As we're waiting for natural heritage too,
Yep.
Paul can always come up with whatever they'd like to put back
Yeah.
for discussion.
Is this pool fence crossing the 50?
It wasn't intended to be. If it is, actually, it won't be. It doesn't look like it's drawn that way a little bit right there, but it would be kept outside the 50.
You going to manipulate the grade around the pool, or is it just going to be sticking on the ground by a couple feet?
I think it'd probably be elevated a small amount above the ground. Right now, the house is on pilings. The house is on a piling system. We've done borings out there. We can actually get a foundation in out there. What you've got in this area is you've got a perched water table. The natural water table's down, but you've got a perched water table up high. So.
Do you have any idea what the percentage changes of I know you're moving some structure out of the 50, but what the change is in development?
No, you mean within the 100? No, I mean the 50's, a complete removal of everything from the 50. So. No.
Is this mostly lawn then, as far as the lot goes?
Yeah, the lot is pretty much, this front area it's kind of a lawn area, and it's got, gravel drive, this is lawn, and then you see the tree line.
Okay.
This is kind of a tree line up in this area here.
You maintaining half of the 25 to 50?
Yes, well, it wouldn't apply to the, oh, yeah, definitely, yep. Yeah, the 25 to 50 is here, nothing's getting done in this area, the existing driveway is actually already in that area anyway.
Okay.
And then there's no work in the 25, essentially no really work in the 25.
Well, you even say that specific standard for the
BW.
percentage is only
just for-
related to bordering vegetation.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
so it would just be this area right there, which we clearly we're okay on that.
Okay.
Just because it comes up a lot, and the 2-foot separation to groundwater
Is
only
only-
applies to bordering vegetated wetlands as well. We
Okay.
get the occasional waiver request for 2-foot separation in coastal dunes and all kinds of weird things. So
Any
only
other,
for those.
any other questions from the commission or the public?
I do. So I just wanted to say, and Mr. Foster contacted us today, and I apologize for not getting to you guys sooner, but it got to us around noontime today. And meeting days get kind of crazy. But Mr. Herb Foster contacted us. He's representing, or he's part of the family that has the Retzoff, Foster backwards, Corporation. It's the direct abutter to the side. And he's had a couple questions and concerns that I wanted just to relate, just to get on the record because he wasn't able to make it today. He was curious how you guys would handle the pool runoff, or any water from the pool. In particular, they have significant concerns about the impact of the proposed construction and buildings on water resources. With a large main house and a guest house on a small lot, the impact of new wastewater inputs and new demands on the sole source aquifer supply will be significant. We also question the wisdom of constructing a swimming pool in close proximity to the ecologically fragile coastal resources in a vegetated wetland. His next point, lot coverage, seems like a huge amount of structures for a very small plot, and generally not in keeping with the Crow's Nest Way neighborhood. Not many pools in this part of Owinnet, and this pool is only a few feet from our property line. And then, more relevant to our concerns, the screening for both sight and noise, including pool noise, and he had a question if there'd be lights around the pool, essentially. And then he did acknowledge that he understands that some of those concerns are not concerns for this board. But we explained to him that we would at least get his, since we didn't have a chance to even circulate it to Paul, get his comments on the record.
You can send me.
Yeah, we'll absolutely send it to you.
Sure, no problem.
Or if you want to address any of those now, you're more than welcome to.
No, I mean, I think we're back. I mean, I think a lot of them were HDC concerns.
Yeah.
The conditioning of the pool, as far as the discharge and how that is typically a condition you put on your orders. Anyway, I mean, the lot is in a lug 1. It, meets the ground cover requirements under the zoning component and so forth, so.
Different concerns for different.
Yes.
And the septic stuff would be more Board of Health
Yep.
than us.
Yeah,
so-
it will be a require a permit from the Board of Health for the 2-bedroom system.
I just wanted to get his letter on the record for us.
Yeah,
Get it
thank you,
circulated to
yes.
everyone, but
Do you have like an erosion rate for this area? Is the dune?
This area it's very, I don't have it in front of me, but it's a minimal, that shoreline is pretty stable. You've got the coastal, the dune is here, you've got the coastal, there's the coastal bank back down this way.
I'm just
But-
wondering because we're
Yeah, you don't have
right
a.
on that 50.
It's not a,
so
it's not
we're
a,
eroding
it's
that
not
part.
a dynamic shoreline by any means. But I can put the erosion rates in it's, through the CZM stuff, I'm sure it's gonna be fairly low. As I said, this lot here isn't, where we are right now is not even actually in the flood zone. I mean, there's a velocity zone, but it's way down on the beach side.
the water line is a ways away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not it's a pretty level area till you get down to the beach too. It's not like you're elevated within that area. It's not really a rapidly eroding shoreline.
Kind of maybe on the driveway a little farther away than sandy approaching a little bit closer to the vegetated wetland.
Oh, you mean this? Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pull it away a little bit,
Yep.
at least to where it was.
Yeah, maintaining what's already there.
I wish we could
Yeah. There's no reason why I couldn't.
Yeah.
No reason why I couldn't do it.
Well, if there's no further questions, you need to continue this.
I need to continue. Yes.
So, unless I hear an objection, we'll continue this for 2 weeks. Okay, thanks, Paul. Okay, Nantucket Wheelhouse LLC, 13 Mass Ave.
For the applicant, Art Gasparo, before you tonight for residential redevelopment within the buffer zone to a coastal dune, as well as within land subject to coastal storm flowage. You may remember this property. This is the one with the tight tank. The septic system had been installed and then removed and replaced with the tight tank. The new owners are now looking to renovate the existing structure, lift it up to comply with flood zone requirements, make some various modifications, including additions, as well as decks, add additional steps to get to the structure at the higher location, proposed garage, and then to renovate the existing secondary structure. We have shown a proposed silt fence at the limit of work, and it does go into the 25-foot buffer zone in the area where it follows the existing edge of lawn, which would allow for work to occur to the house and to replace the existing deck. We have requested a waiver for all of the additions to the house have been kept outside of the 50-foot buffer zone, but there is one proposed deck on the north side of the house right here, which this is the 50, and that deck is within the 50-foot buffer zone. The rest of the work doesn't require a waiver, I guess is don't have detailed landscape plans for the proposal, though, at this point, we just ask for, most of it is existing lawn. The only part of brush that you can see that's being proposed to be cut is right here, which would then also, I assume, become lawn. And with that, I'd be happy to address questions or concerns with the proposal.
Real quickly, I'm just going to add on, as part of the waiver too, for technical purposes, the new set of the, 2 additional stairs going on the existing stairs is work inside the 50 as well.
Yeah, so the deck and additional steps, thank you.
Yes, no problem.
Are part of the waiver request, so there's additional structural elements within 50 feet.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think it's probably best if I recuse myself from this hearing. I've done a little bit of work on the property.
Okay.
I don't plan on doing any additional, but
You never know.
There you vote.
Any other questions?
I was just at the resource area boundaries were approved per the last filing as part of the septic system work, which we did obtain certificates of compliance for.
Oh, before I forget too, I double checked with the Board of Health too. I know Art said it the other day. The additions on the building that are proposed do not affect the tight tank installation or approval.
In other words, not creating any additional bedrooms.
Bedrooms.
Did you move the old tank, or the new?
We took out 2 old tanks and the leach bed and replaced it with the 4,000 gallon tight tank,
Oh yeah, that was a total removal.
which I don't know how much you want to get into that, but there's a special district for tight tanks on the other side of the Mills Bridge, so we fall into that.
Well, they're adding structure inside the 50, and we'd often ask for some kind of mitigation, but instead of adding vegetation, they're actually going to remove shrub vegetation. I guess I would feel better if they maintained the existing shrub cover if they want to add that deck.
I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that's a function of being able to do the work to the structure.
Okay.
Be able to put the foundation in, to get around here.
So they're going to mow it, not necessarily if they just mowed it and let it revegetate then.
I could, further investigate that with them, but I was thinking once it was gone, because it's gonna get, you're gonna have excavations that are required for installing the new foundation, for lifting the house, so you've gotta be able to get around there. And that portion is outside of 25.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the 25, right?
That's correct.
I'd have to agree. I'd rather leave the vegetation to come back.
Or to be replanted with something similar.
I'm sure we could, if that's the condition of the project, I would just love to know that. The house is what they're really concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could certainly condition that
We
that could be just allowed to regrow or replanted with species in kind upon completion of construction.
What's everybody else think of that?
I agree with it.
Okay, sounds like it's
fine.
okay.
You can certainly condition that, that's no problem.
Anything else from the commission or the public? So, you want to close this one, Art?
Yes, please.
Jeff, do we have what we need to close?
Yes.
Do I have a motion to close?
Motion to close?
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you. or with Commissioner Shampoo recused. Okay, 3 Beacon Lane nominee trust at 3 Beacon Lane.
Once again, Art Gaspar, the applicant, knows a lot of lines on this plan. So I think a synopsis is probably in order. And I would start off with this is pending review with Natural Heritage, so we will ultimately need to continue. And I could color up a plan for the next meeting if that would maybe help. But the long and the short is that, again, this is a residential redevelopment project within the buffer zone to coastal bank being the most restrictive resource area. There's vegetated wetlands, but the top of the bank is the most restrictive. And there's existing house structure. It's kind of grayscaled in up in this area, which is partially within the 50-foot buffer zone. That structure is being removed entirely. All of the new structures are outside of the 50-foot buffer zone, and the new driveways and limits of disturbance, the 25 here, are outside of the 25-foot buffer zone. New septic system will be outside of the 100-foot buffer zone, and I saw. I had also, I thought I included, there is a landscape plan in the application, I thought, but if I didn't include that as a full size, I could get that as well for the next meeting. So I guess perhaps an abbreviated presentation discussion tonight, and if you have concerns that you wanted me to address, I'd be happy to, and then I could try to make the stuff a little bit clearer for you for the next meeting. There's a proposed well also, but again, it's outside of the 25-foot buffer zone that is in our jurisdiction.
Well, I just want to let everybody know that Mass Audubon has a conservation restriction on the abutting property, but we have no fee interest in that property. So I'm just going to stay on unless
I have
you...
no concern or objection on that basis, unless you want to get no.
No. Well, yeah,
He's
we'll
reserving
see.
his right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is all gonna be
This is the edge of lawn, so we did do the thick line to show you the edge of lawn, and then driveway, and then this is the lawn going back up in here.
Okay, and then this is,
Native vegetation, undisturbed buffer zone.
I'm trying to remember if there's a patch of frag coming into this wetland down here. It's a cat.
I don't know. I didn't go investigate that.
But I guess if
can
you're not
certainly
looking for
look into
waivers,
it.
then don't have
Again,
any letters.
boardwalk, this is all outside of, I know this plan is really hard to follow without coloring, but this is the 100.
Yeah, there's a significant
okay.
portion of the work that's outside of jurisdiction.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but we just wanted to
Green's
show.
100, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the green is the 100 on that plan. Thank you, Jeff.
No problem. I would say there is one waiver that has been requested, and it's the 2-foot separation of groundwater.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's- right. And
But there's nothing required as far as setbacks or percentages or any other.
dewatering would occur outside of your jurisdiction entirely, since there's areas of the property that are beyond the 100-foot. We'll pop it back up in here somewhere for sure.
Okay, any questions for Art? Or anything from the public? Okay, well, do you want to continue for
Sure.
2 weeks?
So, get you
Okay.
some information. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, amended orders. Glenhurst West Realty Trust at 137 Cliff Road.
Once again, Art Gasparo, and Alpha Reed for the applicant. This is the property which is up next to Tuppence Links. as you may remember. And there has been permitting that was done at the end of the new road that goes in, known as Chase Links. And so the existing order allows for the residential development, and the portions of the structures are under construction. There is, on the northerly end of the lot, an area where we are proposing some lawn area. There'll be a grass path that connects the residential area to up to this lawn area. And then we've got a boardwalk that goes down to a set of beach stairs. And they're proposing a meadow and a fire pit with sort of a kind of a curved linear sitting bench, which is all outside of the 50-foot buffer zone. And there was a landscape plan with this one as well, which may be in the packets. It may be clearer, or it gives quite a bit of additional detail in terms of, you know, the construction details of what's being proposed there. But again, we're providing essentially a 50-foot no disturb or limit of work along the top of the bank, other than the access to the beach, and let's say set of beach stairs for access. No, it's funny because I only had it, so I would have thought that, and I don't have my whole.
I have a very small version of it.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, that's it. So when I saw it in your packets, it would be more clear. So it gives you the details of the removable aluminum walkway with 2 sets of landings, the fire pit, the meadow, the planting. You kind of knew you'd be interested in this. They've listed out beach grass, bearberry, Virginia rose, coastal goldenrod, salt-tolerant grass mix, and fescue blend sod.
Okay.
So that's for.
Outside of 50 even, but for all this area.
For this?
Yes.
So
So you have meadow areas that surround. It would be, this is maybe a little clearer, so the stippled area is your meadow, and then this is your lawn.
And the lawn.
And the grades go away from, you know, from the bank significantly. You know, top of the bank is 29, so then you come down to 20, 26, 27 down in here. And you've got conservation restrictions on this property, and you've got 50-foot no disturb buffer zones as a result of permitting backwards for whole subdivision and natural heritage. So there's significant protection to the resource areas by the nature of having a 50-foot no disturb buffer zone.
And I guess when you say lawn, this is going to be manicured lawn requiring irrigation, fertilizer.
Absolutely. Within best management practices.
Okay. Any other questions? Anything from the public? Okay. Hearing not. Do I have a motion to close the hearing and issue the amended order?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thanks, Art. Okay, Pulpus Harbor, 250 Pulpus Road.
Thanks, Art. There's one. Just gotta dig up better. You can get started though.
Good evening, Mark Ridge from Site Design, representing the applicants at 250 Pulpus Road. This is a property that we spent
quite a good amount of time on a year or so ago, discussing all kinds of things, including a tennis court, which we discussed at length. The tennis court has now gone away, and we are hoping to replace it with a detached garage right here. The detached garage is entirely outside of the 50-foot buffer to BVW, the coastal bank, all other wetland resource areas. It's about an 830 square foot structure. That's pretty much the main change, is that the tennis court and the fence around it are going away, and the garage is coming in its place.
Okay, any questions?
Is this on home? Or this is 100, this
The blue is the
200?
100-foot.
The blue is the 100.
The 50 is the pink, and the red is the 25. The orange is silk fence.
I seem to remember lengthy conversations about wetland scenic views on this, or am I remembering some other property?
You are remembering correctly. Well, the house, the center of the house is at about elevation 15. The center of the garage is at elevation 9.
Okay, so it's actually lower.
The garage is going to be lower than the house that is going to be a little bit seaward of it.
Yeah. If you guys drive down the Pulpus Road, this is that lot. You can see kind of the four posts for what would look like was going to be the tennis court, but the lot drops off significantly for Pulpus Road.
It drops off and then it comes back up, and the house is on the higher
That's how I
ground,
remember it.
so the garage is going kind of down in that hole.
Just so I'm clear, originally you had the driveway, right? It had to skirt like around the swimming pool to access up here. I'm just trying to remember back. to the
No, we
original.
originally had a driveway.
Because the tennis court was right here.
We had a tennis court right here. We had a driveway coming up to the house here. There's a second driveway.
Okay.
I'm not sure
You
why.
can see this new one here. I had just thought for some reason it.
Yeah, it was actually coming in on this side, and it was considerably bigger coming up just in front of the house. So it's a shorter driveway coming in now, and most of the driveway is outside of the 100.
Lines on that
Do you, this is a little bit separate. Do you have any photos or any information on how it's revegetating since the cutting and
No, the rest of the site work hasn't started yet, and a lot of that revegetation, we're just going to let it occur naturally while work is ongoing, and then replant if needed in addition to it. Nothing has happened on the site since we got approvals. They've been tied up with HDC, building, et cetera, so we're just coming back now to kind of finalize the plans before work starts. But nothing has been done on site since we last discussed this, no work at all.
Any other questions? Anything from the public? Okay, I guess, do I have a motion to close the hearing and issue the amended order?
So moved.
All in favor? Any opposed?
I'm opposed.
Okay, that motion carries with Commissioner Arisman opposed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, that takes us to the public meeting request for determination. Hanson Realty Trust at 11 Mass Ave.
Jeff Blackwell for the applicant. The project is to simply install a new well. The existing well has failed, it's an old driven point, and wetland, and then the piping and the wiring goes directly to the west side of the house. It's a very limited project.
Okay, it's outside the 50. Any questions?
Is this water drinkable?
We don't know. It's certainly appropriate for showering and so forth. The owner is up into her 70s, and I suggest that she might want to be drinking bottled water if she has hypertension issues or anything. But it is what it is. We need water.
We'll determine that when it's drilled.
Any other questions? Okay, Jeff, do you have a recommendation?
I do. I recommend a positive 2A confirming the resource area boundaries as requested, and then a -3 allowing for the work within the buffer zone.
Do I have that motion?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
The Elliott at 1 Elliott's Way.
John Bracken for the applicant.
Somehow I got that too.
This project consists of a straight septic system upgrade for a failed septic system for title transfer. No proposed additions or any other work on the proposed house, on the existing house, excuse me. The project falls within the 100-foot buffer of a coastal bank under local jurisdiction. The base of the bank does not come in contact with the buffer zone, but it does come in contact with the coastal dune. Currently, the septic tank is at about the 50-foot setback, and the leaching pit is between the 50 and 100-foot setback. Both of those will be pumped and filled with clean sand and abandoned in place. A new sewer line will be run between the 50 and 100-foot setback to get to the new soil absorption system, which is located pretty far outside the 100-foot buffer, 200 miles away.
You said it's an upgrade. Is it a different kind of system or just a new system being put in?
It's definitely a different kind of system. It's an old leaching pit system.
Oh,
so it's
okay,
not
so-
allowed anymore. And the new system is a chamber system to go into the driveway designed for heavy-duty loading.
Okay. Any questions? Jeff, do you have a recommendation?
I do. I'd recommend a -3 for this one as well.
Do I have a motion to issue a -3 for Elliott's Way?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
It still weirds me out.
Okay, Olaf Clausen, 30 Eel Point Road.
Don Bracken for the applicant. This project consists of constructing a proposed shed to enclose existing pool equipment, which is currently just inside the 100-foot buffer. The closest point between the shed and the isolated vegetated wetland is 95 feet. These wetland areas were flagged by LEC consultants probably about 4 or 5 years ago, at the time when the pool and the cabana and other structures were built. The limit clearing did receive approval from Natural Heritage. We also, which is still valid, we also got the additional proposed clearing approved from Natural Heritage as well.
Do you know the size of that shed? It looks pretty small.
It is,
About 5 by 10 maybe?
it looks about that size. I apologize, we didn't label the size of it.
Any other questions? Jeff, do you have a recommendation?
Yes, I would recommend a -3 for this as well.
Okay, do I have a motion to issue a -3?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Okay. MBC Realty Trust and LSC Weatherhill, Henry Street between 45 and 47 Holbert Ave.
Once again, Art Gasparo and Arthur Reed. We're before you tonight to confirm the delineation of the boundary that exists between a coastal dune and a coastal beach within the layout of Henry Street. And so we've done, there's transects that run through this so that you can see kind of the topography, and really the boundary is somewhat determined by the vegetation and where there is some root growth left, and then heading into beach grass versus what is clearly pure beach. So this is a just simply a delineation of that small section of boundary. And I did have discussion with Bruce about it, who had reviewed it and was in agreement with my flags.
The context of this, just so you understand why we're concerned with where the boundary is between the two resource areas, is that the town, in connection with its taking and reconveyance of Henry Street to the abutters, is reserving an easement within the beach, but not the dune. And there's a lot of sand out there, and it's not easy to determine for a layman exactly where the boundary should be. We are doing this RDA in order to, get an official determination so that the easement will, to be utilized by the town will be shown and limited to the beach.
So who owns the property at this point? Is it?
The town has authorized the taking, as they have in various other of these yard sale situations, of the road. It will be reconveyed to the midline, to the owner on each side, subject to an easement for passage from the street to the beach area.
You gonna put a fence or something, a split rail fence or something along that line so that people know where it is, or?
We're gonna have to discuss that with the town. I mean, it's, I think that we'd like to do something like that, but we don't have any specific arrangements on that right now. The point of this, at this stage of the game, is to establish the line of the easement.
Question, you just mentioned previously something about the easement affecting the beach but not the dune?
Right.
A proposed easement.
Okay.
So a proposed one big beach easement, essentially. They'll be on the beach but not on the dune, so they needed to know where does that start and stop.
Okay.
And
Public use of the beach.
Right.
And at the same time, the dune, which we would like to see protected, would not be subject to the same use by the general public.
So there would be like an easement path for the public, or there?
Yes, there'll be an easement path.
Through the
There's
dune
actually
to
an
the
easement.
beach.
There's a path there right now.
Sure.
Right.
And that easement will be reserved by the town as well.
It's just to explain how some of these work sometimes is the town will take a linear easement that's essentially a footpath wide, so, 4 to 6 feet wide depending on situations, but then the easement itself, for lack of a better term, flares out to encompass the use of the whole beach.
Right.
So I think the purpose of this is to say the 4 foot wide easement for access is going to go from Holbert Ave to essentially the coastal dune line, and then from the coastal dune line forward, public access is the whole beach. It's just to know where that starts and stops.
Right.
So if they wanted to come in and, put a fence to delineate the path or maintain the path, everyone knows where it starts and stops and where it is.
Okay. This was just very confusing to have this going into a street and to have the abutters filing it.
Well, first of all, anybody can file an RDA.
Oh,
Secondly,
I guess
they're
if they,
probably owned by operation of law the middle right now until the town perfects the taking.
okay.
And that was why I did it under both, and why I did it, and I got a butters list, because I was under a situation of, well, how do I do this in a way, it seems like an awfully lot, but we want to do things exactly procedurally correct. I got a butters list for both, about, you know, even though it's for this lot, because I couldn't get one just for this, but because under the assumption of the derelict fee statute and the center line of that way, that would be the best way to go about it.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Jeff, do you have a recommendation?
Yes, I recommend that we can issue a positive 2A confirming the resource area boundaries as shown.
Okay, do I have that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let me get my signature on here so I can't do two things at once. Okay, certificates of compliance.
Oh, right.
Looks like a land bank, 21 Sacagea Pond. 21 is at Sacagea Road, actually.
Sacagea Road, but it is for Sacagea Pond. So if you guys remember this one real quickly, the land bank came in to do some work on the earthen footpath from Sacagea Road that runs down to Sacagea Pond. A couple of years ago, there was a big washout area. So they've repaired that and installed their earthen berm and then regraded out that path. It's just a regular sand footpath and just redirected so runoff doesn't channel down that it channels onto the road. But I would say that the work is done in compliance and is functioning as it should be.
Question, was there invasive species management tied to this one? Or was it across the street on a different one?
No, there was some.
No, they did do some of that. Do you want to comment on that, Rachel? On the invasive species management on that?
We did do invasive species management this past year. What we discovered in doing it is that the extent of invasive species management is quite a bit greater than we originally anticipated. And based on what's going on in the neighborhood, we are opting to put our efforts elsewhere. So we did actually treat and rip out and do a lot of things last year to Boursemberry and Bittersweet. But until kind of a Quidnet association gets together and decides to really tackle that whole area, it's going to be challenging. I have heard that there's something going on in the
Right across the street there is, yes.
right, and so I'm kind of waiting to see what happens there.
But Quidnet is just packed with
Right.
porcelain berry especially. It's really bad throughout Quidnet.
Yeah, but that's probably our biggest seed source is that lot.
Yeah, that
directly,
lot, yeah.
what would that be? At least, west of the parking area.
It's actually kind of north.
It's all mowed down now.
Whatever direction that is.
Across the street.
Across the street from the parking area.
Okay.
So we requested not to continue that anymore, but we did perform that last year.
So you did like one season,
We did one season, and we're sort of discouraged. So,
Okay. So, Jeff, do you have a recommendation?
I recommend that we can issue the certificate of compliance.
Do I have that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, Land Bank, 28 Washington Street.
This one's a little trickier, but still pretty straightforward. This is the project that was for the moving of the Mariah Mitchell Aquarium and the related lot. We've already issued a partial certificate on the two vacant lots where the work was completed. For lots of different reasons, that project for Mariah Mitchell isn't moving forward at this point. They've discontinued that project for now, for lots of different reasons. So the land bank is wanting to close out the open permit and complete the partial certificate of compliance to a full certificate of compliance. And then any new work, including relocating that aquarium again, would require a new notice of intent to do that. Once that becomes a more realistic project.
Okay. Do I have a motion to issue the certificate of compliance for the land bank at 28 Washington Street?
So moved.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, 14, or Saratoga LLC at 14 Tennessee Ave.
Jeff, explain this one because there's more.
Jeff Bronco for the applicant. The project is basically constructed in compliance with the order conditions except for these elements which I'll mention. There's some steps that are coming off the porch. And, do you remember,
Sure.
I highlighted
Oh, that's that one. I wonder what I was doing with that.
there's steps that come off the decks and porch, which were not shown on the architectural plans, but this property is within land subject to coastal storm flowage, so the building was elevated, which necessitated construction of some steps. They're very minor addition to the project as a whole, and that's one element. There's also some elevated utility platforms. Oops, where did I turn off?
Oh, over here.
Over here that are within land subject to coastal storm flowage, but more than 100 feet away from the vegetated wetlands, so those are fairly minor. And at the time that I requested the certificate of compliance, it didn't strike me, although after I submitted it, I saw that there was a wire fence constructed, and some of the wire fencing is actually within the resource area. So I brought that matter to the attention of the owner's builder, and he informed them that that fencing is likely going to have to come out. So apologize for not including that in the original request, but that's certainly an element that was not shown on the permit plan some years ago and does not comply with your regulations and requirements.
So, I guess my recommendation in this case would be to essentially order the fence removed, and then we'll hold the certificate until its removal.
That's what I was wondering
That would be
too.
my recommendation.
I can provide a revised as-built plan for the grounds.
But I would say the steps in the elevated platforms are within substantial compliance. They were put in to meet the flood zone, so that was my recommendation for that one.
Guess we're going to hold off on issuing the certificate of compliance and then just do an order to remove that fence from within the,
We can just do it from within the open. I would
Yeah.
say not to trouble with the enforcement action if we say we're not going to issue the certificate of compliance till it's removed and it's an open request.
okay.
Within the next 2 weeks, they can yank out a wire fence.
Do I have that
Or
motion?
be inspected.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, orders of conditions.
Sorry, I'll just take what I'm passing on. There should be some extras. So I figured we can run through really quickly the ones that I drafted, that was an issue, and then we'll talk about a few that we need some.
Okay, first one I have on the list here is Cascade Code 2 Wildlife Refuge at Great Point, et cetera, the trustees of the reservations.
Yes, so it didn't really have a lot of conditions. The two conditions outside of the normal one there are required from their natural heritage determination that they have. Other than that, it's really the maintenance of the status quo at Great Point and Cascade.
Okay, no waivers required. Do I have a motion to issue as drafted?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, Ronald and Nancy Lindsay at 15 Pippin's Way.
All right, I do have one more condition to add after tonight to this one. Number 20, that just requires that all exterior lighting be directed downward. 'Cause that came up during the public hearing.
I know we've kind of made this a standard, but can we make sure that all of those, the plants are straight species and not
21.
weird cultivars?
Yeah, no cultivars. So it'll be number 21 that no cultivars are permitted by the board.
Okay. So do I have a motion to issue as amended?
Motion to issue as amended.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay, Knight Realty Trust at 12 East Lincoln Ave.
This was for that, the construction project in the flood zone. That was the one that we had the concern about what was gonna happen to the roof runoff, and they addressed that, so I didn't really have any conditions for that one. Once they fixed that, it was pretty straightforward.
Okay. In that case, do I have a motion to issue as drafted?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries unanimously. And Hildebrand at 60 Crooked Lane.
All right, this one we closed last time. This is the one where the one condition that we had was that the shed that they had proposed inside the 50 be constructed outside of the 50. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I'm just glad when I went to do a site inspection, I didn't break my ankle on the deer
They're
gate.
grates. They're crazy.
It's good.
There's one other place I've seen that has that one.
It's like being out west when you drive
I
around
used
on the
to
roads
hate-
and they have all the cattle gates.
Yeah, I used to hate walking over those things. Okay, so in that case, do I have a motion to issue as drafted?
Motion to issue as drafted.
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
And we can skip all the rest of them except for 13 Mass Ave.
Okay, 13 Mass Ave, Nantucket Wheelhouse LLC.
So that was the one, we'd had a condition number 20, that, the disturbed vegetation allowed to be regrow naturally.
Or replanted if necessary.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this was one with the deck in the 50, right?
Yes.
Okay, do I have a motion to issue as amended?
Motion to issue.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously.
What was it?
Okay,
All right, and then if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'm just gonna go
yep.
real quickly here. The ones that I had noted to draft in order for next time included, 8 Highbush Path, Edelman Alderson, the One Crow's Nest Way project, the Beach Nut LLC, and then the 3 Beacon Lane project we were waiting for Heritage on. And then I had a note on 165 for a positive order pending the skirt and structure issue on those ramps. All right. And then the only other one we closed tonight, I saved the best for last, is the Pocono Neighbors project. And if it's all right, I can kind of explain where I was thinking about going. Is kind of thinking about melding essentially the SHMO order with the failure criteria that they provided with the blend of some of the stuff from the Wisconsin Beach project as it related to some of the invertebrate monitoring and storm requirements for those, if the positive order is necessary. The negative order is what the flavor of the board is. Those are pretty easy to write. So just need which direction we want to go, or if anyone has any other thoughts or things that they'd like to see.
I mean, their failure criteria is more based on whether the structure or not can handle the environment it's in, as opposed to sort of a timeline of when the bank itself sort of takes over after it's sort of been reborn with the help of these roles. I'd like to sort of see sort of an ending timeline for, as opposed to just keep putting roles back into. I mean, as it's written, the failure criteria, you know, always be replacing roles. So the roles would always.
Well, they'd have to come back in and.
Well, it says 50% after, you know, over a 2-year period, they'd have to come back in. So I hate to see this sort of being an open maintenance.
Just a quick thought on that. I wonder if you put a condition included in the order that said any maintenance to replace rolls beyond the 3rd year would require essentially an extension of the order of conditions. So something that would trigger
To keep it.
if I were the applicant, I would want to trigger an automatic extension to maintain those roles or
Right.
evaluate those roles.
Evaluate.
Seventy grade between 5 and 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, if you say, right, if you're assuming they, after after that time frame.
I mean, the one thing
The thing is, if you're replacing pieces, it's not going to degrade.
The one thing to keep in mind is, even with extensions, unless the governor intervenes again, our permit will terminate at 6 years at that point.
Period,
So,
yeah. Then we could say any work has to come in with a new.
yeah, I did think that this was another project, especially given everything together and the size, that at least a yearly appearance in front of the commission to present what's going on. That's probably appropriate. I know some leads get written reports and photos, that this would be one to actually say, you have to show up and
I
explain
think
what's
that's a
going
good
on.
idea, yeah.
Yeah, this is one to be seriously
This is
watched
big,
for
yeah.
sure.
What is our
This will be a
wording
trend everywhere.
as far as no adverse impacts to the surrounding habitats? I don't know that I feel confident saying that there's no adverse impacts without a benchmark survey, without seeing typical myofauna, without knowing what's feeding the habitat out front, and comparing the pit soil we're using instead of the thousands-year-old glacial deposits.
Well,
Oh, the pits are old too.
But it's different.
It's definitely deeper.
It's different, and it's out. I think the pits are mostly coming from outwash plains versus different terminal moraines and things. So you have a different makeup.
Do the organisms live in the bank, or do they develop as it when it?
So some of the
falls on the
organisms
beach?
that would live in the bank would maybe die and feed the organisms in the beach. You know, it's just it's such a circular system, and I just don't think that we have the right data to say that there's no impact here with a project this size in a harbor that's as sensitive as ours. So I don't know if we can make some sort of finding, or if that's just my stance on this one.
Can we put some sort of condition in that, you know, our benchmark conditions be substantially the same as
Well,
a year in? Or?
I think the board's actually granted kind of a unique case, in this case, that no work by the heritage condition, and I mean, you guys can certainly say it too, no work can start until into October on this. So there's the summer season to gain invertebrate information, habitat information to the east and the west, in this case, information about what's coming up on the shore or in the near shore area. And maybe the way to do that is then to ask for, before they start construction, a presentation of that data in front of the board to see what was found through the summer, and then when they come back the next year, you have that to compare to. You can ask questions the first year.
Well, maybe one thing that might help with this is if they looked at a study of what was living, since they're going to vegetate this system, and it's not just a pile of sand like in most cases. I mean, I guess a lot of them have beach grass in it, but if they're going to vegetate this and they expect it to sort of stabilize, there may be a community develop in the reconstructed bank as well. And they could look and see what's in there. I don't know how long those kind of things take to get going. Soil is so complicated, it's...
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and there just haven't been the proper studies, really, on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, we just don't know.
Right.
They do have somebody lined up to do that.
Yep.
Discussed.
Correct. They do have someone engaged to do their invertebrate.
Monitoring on the beach, huh?
Are we, qualified to evaluate that data? It's kind of what I was concerned to.
Well, the good news is I have a couple people that we have lined up for peer review on the other big coastal engineering project. So maybe something for invertebrates. You can see if they're interested in looking at that one too.
Well, what's the feeling of the commission? Positive order on this?
I'd be for positive if there's sort of like an end date to the components of this. You know, I mean, I know what you were saying. I mean, I don't want to see it just being rebuilt.
Well, I think that's, I think if you can kind of force the extension of it, you can evaluate.
Yeah.
You can evaluate the structure over the time period and then make a final. In 6 years, you're going to see if what's held or what's been replaced or how often or what the condition of the tubes
Right.
are. If you can
Is it
evaluate that.
dependent basically on that,
Yeah.
on those roles. If it becomes dependent on those roles after 6 years, it doesn't seem to me like it's.
Yeah. And that's something too. I mean, you can always
Yeah.
call them back in if it's something that they're having difficulty maintaining or doing. I guess the other question I'd have too is the feeling from the presentation on the 4x4 posts being included or excluded.
To me, they're a fairly minor component.
Well, if they're willing to reduce them, why
Yeah,
not?
take them out.
Or totally, I think you need something to hold them.
Yeah,
They still have the-
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
I mean,
just
for
posts,
clarity,
they're
were
not.
they all going to be removed or
Certainly, just no posts. The anchors, the rest of that system, from what I've seen, and we can do without posts. So you just put a condition, or you can say if you want to revise plan prior to the issuance of the order that doesn't show the posts, I could do that, or you could just condition it.
Well, I think
no posts.
what we've been doing on these big structures is requiring, and I think it's a good condition to do, is similar to what we did for the Bluff project, not to keep comparing it to that project, is to require an as-built be filed upon initial construction, so we know what the initial conditions are. That would, if you order no posts, that as-built would show that there are no posts.
I guess I also wonder, and I just don't see it used here very much. I have experience with like ArcGIS, and why with some of these projects we're not taking data points so we can constantly be seeing what's happening and do better modeling. So you could see changes from storm to storm if someone's getting and inputting the proper data points.
It's planning on surveying it in.
Yeah.
And that's better than
Maybe
GIS.
twice a year surveys that are even more accurate than, GIS. What I was proposing as part of the monitoring, I think is probably a good practice, is to leave the previous line on the plan, maybe dash that one, solid line, and then you can see last time, because what I've been doing is showing snapshots of existing conditions. Here's your plan. But it doesn't really show you, well, how did that change, which I think gets to your point. So I think if the protocol for the monitoring reports are to show the previous position of really top and bottom of bank water line, those really, I think, water line, of course, you simply observe. But what does get difficult is trying to overlay topography, and of course, the changes, But, I think what you're really looking for is top and toe, right? Where do those go in time? And it's going to tell you how, and and from there also the face of the bank. So the profile view, you can see that. And I think that would get you at every 6 months. You're going to get a lot of data.
Yeah, I guess just the inputting into a program like that, you can model differently. So.
I caught the plan.
Right.
That's a bigger issue than
Yeah, I think,
this project. It'd be nice to be able to put them all into like the town GIS or to Morris or to Oliver with the state, but that's different. That's more of a problem of ours than in the states that they're doing. Because if they collect the data, even the raw data from, all of their points that they're referencing, all our northings, eastings, and elevations, that you'd have to just upload that into whatever modeling software you were choosing to use and have it to compare to. But that's what you would essentially have to do. The raw information is there, and I think you can show it graphically. I just don't. You'd have to find someone that would be wanting to construct a model and try to establish the parameters to run a model to do it.
So maybe that's something the commission needs to think about as an island-wide. I just think it's hard to keep perspective when we have all these projects and we're not getting a cohesive data set to follow.
That sounds like we need a graduate student that needs a big
I can
project.
contact my graduate professor who works with Yale and Penn. There's definitely people out there who want data to have their students model. But just with these larger projects, I think it could be useful.
Okay, is the consensus of the commission then to do a positive order? Does anybody not want a positive order?
I'm going to go negative.
Yeah.
We need a positive order.
All right. I'll draft it up. It's pretty clear as mud, but I'll copy something together and tweet the other ones. All right, that was it. We can move to section D.
Okay, extension requests, Squam Road Nominee Trust at 97 Squam Road.
Jeff Blackwell for the applicant. Just to go back to the original project parameter, which there was a large house on this property, and the order of conditions that was issued was to remove that structure and to replace it with much less square footage of structure, one of which is a garage studio and the other is a gazebo. The garage studio has been constructed. The site has been stabilized vegetatively. but they just haven't gotten around to building the gazebo. And they want to build it, but they just don't know when they're going to get around to it. So we're asking for a 3-year extension for the smallest element of the project.
Okay, that sounds pretty straightforward. Do I have a motion to issue 3 one-year extensions? All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions on the monitoring reports? Mostly they were photos.
We're just listing those to get people credit that get those in. We're rapidly approaching our deadline for people to have responded to our mailings. So hopefully we'll get a last little rush of stuff in. So, but I'd say our mailing has definitely sparked a positive response. We've got a lot of
Rachel's been busy. Geez, look at this. Land bank, land bank, land bank. One of those was that project where they redid that bank for the parking lot, wasn't it?
22 Cathcart, yes.
Yeah, that was good. I was actually down there. It was really good.
Yeah.
I was thinking we should go out there on a site visit one of these days when that
You want me
comes
to take
up
the
for.
cooler too? Cooler and the barbecue?
There we go.
The beach?
And then summer day.
Okay. There must be stuff on the back here. Okay, approval of minutes for May 18th. Unless there's any comments on the minutes, we'll approve them by unanimous consent. Okay, we approve the minutes by unanimous consent. Great, thank you. Okay, commissioners' comments. Oh, wait, enforcement actions. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead
I'll
of
go
myself.
really fast because I'm getting beckoned downstairs too.
Oh, yeah.
I met with the attorney for the 2 North Beach Street complex on the site today. As a new attorney, and he had no idea about what was going on before. So we went over that, and I spoke with our counsel. So I spoke with George Pucci about that. And right now, the attorney for the violator understands that at a minimum, a notice of intent is required to do anything on that lot, and would like to get some resolution to is it a wetland, is it not a wetland, and if it isn't, to get the gravity manhole permitted correctly, and if it is, to get it removed correctly, and he is understanding that that is under, penalty of tickets that are written up by the police chief already. So he's got some motivation to get that done. George seemed to think if we can get resolution on that resource area in the middle, that would go a long way in ending enforcements and things for that site once and for all. So if we could encourage them to address that with a reputable consultant, that was a good way to go.
Do we have to approve that consultant, I wonder? Should we, is that biasing things?
Well, we can't really, we don't really have that ability. George also said to keep the threat of fines in place, and he also said, once we get things filed, if we still want to issue fines, that he doesn't have any issue with that. So, but his advice was to get things in and get it resolved once and for all, and then if you still want to issue out punitive action, we certainly can. With that, if everyone wants to leave their stuff when we're done, they can. That'd be great. I have to run downstairs. Rachel is here to give an update on the Holly Farm.
Oh, okay.
She's got a narrative that she just finished up today, so she said she would email me that shortly, and we'll get it distributed to everyone, but she wanted to kind of go over the particulars with that moving forward as well. And we can take action. So I have to run downstairs, but...
Okay.
Have fun.
That's going to be awesome.
Okay,
Is Joe still here? She bailed.
Well, there's nothing left to
okay.
be signed or edits to make. You guys can just talk about it.
I just brought these because I was working on it this afternoon, and I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update of where I was at. You don't really have to read the entire thing. I just show you a few of the figures that I put together. I just wanted to highlight, again, we know these are the areas where a disturbance occurred. And I want to make sure that from the Commission's perspective, these are the areas that you're interested in having us do restoration work in. And then I have completed the wetland delineation, and I'll submit all the information in the NOI, but, I mean, I don't know that you need more information past that all of it falls within the 100-foot buffer to the wetland, so, you know, it makes it clean and easy, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and basically what we are proposing to do, I think the important thing is if you skip past the narrative, and, you know, I documented the extent of the damage on the property, but once you go down through there, I have a series of steps with some timeframes associated with them. So, as I said in my last update, you know, there was about close to 500 holly trees that were impacted. I think there's right around 12 cedar trees that were impacted. Probably, I think it was either 100 or 230 linear feet of brush cutting performed in these areas. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the plant species that we're looking at putting in and some of the areas that we're looking at putting them into. Because what I would like to do is come back with an NOI in the next 2 weeks with a concrete landscaping plan associated with it. And then from there, once we had an order of conditions, we'd like to work on cleaning up the site first, removing all the excess wood chips and any sort of associated brush that's left on the site, and removing the invasive species from inside of the holly stand so that they don't take off. And then that would hopefully be done in, you know, the summertime sometime. And I would like to push off any sort of planting until maybe October, when it starts to cool down and there's a greater likelihood that these plants survive. Some of the areas that we were looking at planting were along the path, which is actually the property of 290 Pulpus Road, along that edge of that easement of the path of the road, which is right here, where there was brush cutting along those sides. And I think part of that is being a good neighbor. I think she's concerned about what happened, and so I'd like to see how things come back a little bit over the summer, but you know what, that's mostly going to be proposed to be planted with upland species like black cherry, viburnum, actually no, sorry, I take it back. This area was more of a wetland species composition, and then this area was more upland. So this was like maleberry. I did say some black cherry. I think I also had ilex in there, so winterberry, and what else did I say? Hibiscus blueberry and sweet pepperbush, as those being the primary predominant rodent species. I just kind of want to go through that and make sure those are plants that you're interested in.
They're all good.
I'd prefer not to plant the understory with anything herbaceous. I think we're going to see that bounce back pretty quickly once we clean out the wood chips. And then up above the holly stand on the abutters property, that was actually mostly Lonicera and privet, to the best of my knowledge. With some
So you
black
did
cherry and stuff.
sort of a
There was
favor.
like one cedar in the
Yeah, so I kind of proposed putting in more upland plants in here because it's really kind of dry once you get to that hillside. And so I did say we put in a few cedars and maybe some myrica and viburnum, and I think I also said black cherry because there's a lot of it around there, but I have a list in there. It's all native shrubs as well. And then what I'd like to do is I'd like to wait on the two areas, so the holly and then the small wetland area here, and wait and see what happens with those ones. I was talking with Seth Wilkinson, and he said you should really wait on the hollies until April or September, because in my ideal world, these trees come back. They may not happen, but if everyone can stand to look at a dead holly for just like a little bit longer, then
They may not be dead, they may just be leafless.
right? They may be
We're
leafless.
hoping.
So it may look dead, but I'm really, really hoping. And he said it actually happened to him last year. He planted a set of hollies in May. They dropped all their leaves, and then they started to form some buds closer to September. So I would really like to just wait on these trees. If by September we've seen nothing happen, there's no buds, there's no leaves, we will definitely be looking to replace them.
With what?
I am not going to recommend replacing them with anything other than hollies. If the commission feels like we should look at replacing them with something other than hollies, I am more than open to that.
My personal opinion
I
is,
do. I don't want to go on public record saying that I'm going to replace these with anything other than hollies.
well, if we make you do it though.
If you make me do it, I am happy to do so.
Okay.
So, and just to make sure I'm clear, you're gonna go through the holly stand though and treat any of the honeysuckle bittersweet that's coming
Yes.
up over the summer?
That's part of our cleanup procedure. So it's remove invasives and make sure all the woody debris and brush is gone. We also propose replanting cedars in areas where they've been removed. So, but also, again, I'd like to push that to October. And we do have the capacity to sort of spade in cedars. So we could do that.
Would you make a determination if those are native hollies, American holly, or?
I think they're American. Based
I
on,
sort of came to that conclusion just looking at the leaves.
yeah, that's what I thought. When I looked at them, that's what I thought. I am by no means a holly expert, but I went through the key and that was my interpretation.
That's what it seemed like.
Mhm. So I'd go with American holly. So that's where I'm at. If this looks okay to you guys, I'd like to move forward with an NOI and a concrete landscaping plan. And that's what this is some of what I'll include in it, yes.
In India, they have sacred cows. We have sacred hollies.
I was out there the other day just to, I saw no signs of life, but that could change. I mean, I'm willing to take a shot, you know. Maybe
Forever hopeful, right? Forever hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, they took off so many of the small branches. I mean, it's down to the big stuff. And
Yeah.
Right.
I would expect to see, maybe not yet, I would expect to see little tiny somethings.
Yeah. Seth
But-
said we should wait. So
No, I'm willing to give it a shot.
yeah,
give it a shot.
it ain't going to get any worse.
No, and this also is probably, I mean, there's nothing
It's
to
not the
lose.
time
because
to-
I'm not gonna, right, we're not gonna plant
don't wanna
in
be
big
planting
holly
stuff
trees right
now.
anyways.
Heat of the summer, correct?
Yeah, you don't want to do it now. So
The
yeah.
only thing we'd be doing is removing them, which I think we might as well just wait and see if they happen.
Oh yeah, they got nothing to lose. Except I mean, I'm hoping the public. I mean, people get over it. I mean, it's
Sometimes.
yeah.
So, all right, well, thank you. This will be coming out electronically.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate your paying attention to this. Okay, reports. We don't have CPC here. NPEDC,
Nothing.
mosquito control.
They are going around checking traps, and treating in some areas where they're allowed, which is town property. Something that was mentioned during the last meeting when, the DDCI representative went out to check traps. People have been throwing their own mosquito dunks out, into actually what sounds like it was Conservation Foundation property, but people are self-treating for mosquitoes, and it seems to be evident.
Does Jeff have a copy of this?
If not, but I will be emailing him.
Oh, okay. I'm going to take this if you don't mind.
Please do. There's one customer.
Exactly.
Okay, commissioners' comments.
I guess I have one comment, and I've brought this up before as far as like the soil scraping and land scraping that gets done, especially in light of the article that went through the newspaper as far as the amount of material that's being brought to the landfill that would seemingly be from scraping up stumps, soil, etc. And I just think as a commission, we need to look at the area and the soil surrounding these wetlands as really contributing to the function of the wetlands, and trying to stop the practice of scraping to the 25 and then coming back in and amending. Because I think it's a problem for wetland function, but also, a larger problem for the island. And that's something we should look at.
For regulation. Note for regulation, when we go over the regs.
To look at
be nice if, yeah, people just totally changed how they do landscaping on the island and just, didn't do that. I mean, they go into their lots and just take everything off, take it down to the subsoil, pile the topsoil up, and they destroy the soil structure. They probably kill every organism in there,
And a lot of times they're not even looking at the plant composition that they would maybe leave.
Yeah.
We're just not evaluating that well enough. So I think it's something we should look at.
I've been getting some calls and emails from people who are concerned about the soil piles at the end of Hummock Pond, Nantucket, and et cetera, roads that the town did. And I'm thinking we should bring Dave in to talk about that, about what's happened and what the plans are.
So who's going to vegetate, wasn't it?
Yeah, but right now they're just these mounds.
They're actually the one, I was at Cisco the other day, and it's heavily walked over.
Yeah, everybody's walking on it.
It's a lot less than it was.
So it's sort of just
Well,
reading.
just all the rain and stuff, it's coming down.
Right, that's part of it.
And I'm wondering did they do the dredging on in Pulpus Harbor? I'm wondering if that's what this is.
No, that was going to wait.
No,
So that's coming.
Yeah, they.
Because this is kind of funky looking stuff. It's dark, yeah. I don't know what it is.
I've asked those questions before. What are they using? Yeah, because that should have been vegetated when the soil was dumped off.
It does look like the Nantucket ones work. Stopping that runoff that she.
Right.
The other day.
I think in Dave's defense, they hit the hot part of the season.
No, it's been wet, yeah.
But it has been wet. It's been probably wet enough to get some stuff going. I think that I know that he talked with Craig then about sourcing some plants. But I think they were planning on installing them in September. Fall. So maybe we should bring them in.
Yeah, I think
See
we
what's
should.
going on.
I'll try to remember to email Jeff to ask Dave to come in.
Yeah.
Just to keep on top of it and
Yeah.
just so I know what to tell people when they start sending me all these emails and stuff.
I thought he was going back further on the road. Didn't seem like he did a lot. So he's making 150 feet.
Okay, obviously, we don't have any staff reports tonight, so. Do I have a motion to close?
Motion closed, second.
All in favor? Okay, that motion carries unanimously.